No mercy in the games industry.
Look at me. I am the captain now. What's up, everybody? This is a different voice. I'm sick, so my name is Brett Beck. With me today... No, I'm just messing with you guys. I'm hosting today. It's Chris. It's me. Hi. Brett's here. Say hi to Brett. Brett, say hi to the audience.
Hi, audience.
If you don't know Brett, he is a PlayStation gamer, as am I, and this is Triangle Squared. We are a PlayStation podcast. And I fought Brett in the gauntlet of the abandoned forest, and now I am hosting the show. So, Brett, how are you this week?
I'm doing all right, man. Lots of trying to work my gaming time back up a little bit, which is something I've been struggling with because I have a lot to do. So I'm glad I've gotten to play more, but I'm still in that thing where I only have a couple of games under my belt, and it's been a while since I've beat a game. So I'll be interested to when we hop into actually talking about beating a game. But for now, it's been a good time. I had Chipotle with my wife today. Got off work a little early. It's good times,
dude. You're great.
Times.
Even when you're not hosting, you're hosting because you segue me in something I want to talk about. Dude, I haven't eaten red meat in like 2 weeks and it's fucking killing me. It is the worst.
I don't know if you want to go into too much detail, but is it because of a common problem that you have that we've talked about on the show before?
Yeah, so I get chronic gout and I was getting it again last week to the point where like I was telling my bowling team, like find someone else next week. I was telling work, like find coverage. And then I knew, because like I don't drink very often, and the causes are fish, which I don't eat very much. It's beer, which I don't drink beer. If I'm drinking, it's liquor. And it's red meat. So I just fully cut out red meat. I haven't had anything. And I feel really good, but I'd rather quit smoking cigarettes again than this.
So what does that look like? I mean, are you still like, are you starting to pull more fish in? Are you looking at primarily like pork and chicken, or are you just minimizing meat in general?
It's just been minimizing meat in general. So like I've been, like I would never sit here and say I'm vegetarian. Like I had wings the other day. Like I'm not, pretending that, but I just cut out like cheeseburgers, chilies, like all this kind of stuff, which is super fun for me as a chef, A, because, I like to cook, but B, I work in a burger restaurant for burgers.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. So what it sounds like you're doing is instead of kind of replacing a meal where you feel like you would normally be eating red meat, you're not replacing it with another meat in lieu of it. You're just being like, I'm just gonna eat something else, and whether it's meat or not doesn't really matter. You're not viewing it as I'm trying to cut red meat out, therefore I need to be substituting. You're just going, eat anything other than red meat. And
exactly.
No, that's a lot more fun. I think what happens in the problems with when people do try to do things like that, where it's like, well, I'm substituting, is I think you fool yourself, and I think it's a much harder thing to actually break yourself from if you're trying to quit something, because then you're just shifting your addiction to the alternative, and that's so much easier to fall off of.
Well, as long as the alternative doesn't prevent me from walking for 2 weeks, like I'm kind of fine.
I mean, that's fair.
But it's just one of the cooks I work with at my job was laughing at me because I was I went and I just like offhandedly scooped some chili into a ramekin. I'm about to eat it. Then I just go, fuck, and I threw it across the kitchen. Because they all know I've been talking about this forever. Yeah, except I'm not picking my nose usually.
Usually. Here's the thing, right? People like to walk around and act like they don't occasionally pick their nose. Let's be real. We have fingers with fingernails, and sometimes the most efficient way to get the thing that's bothering you in your nose out is to pick that bad boy. It's all about what you do after picking it and how brazen you are with when and where you pick it. If you can find a little opportunity, if you be like, listen, I got something bothering me in my nose, blowing it's clearly not been working. Let me go find a corner, find a room, go to the bathroom, get it out, throw it away, go about my business.
It's like you just can't be digging for gold in the middle of the fucking room full of people. It's insane.
It's like when people it's this thing where people like to act like people just don't do certain things. Like some people act like people don't fart. Like they just act like they don't fart.
Oh, hell yeah.
And they act like bringing up the thought of farting. And I'm like, that is so crazy. Because as a human, every one of us does it.
Right.
But for some reason, you're so shamed at the thought of this bodily function that you will not even admit that you do it. And I think farting is probably the worst example, but I think a lot of people treat picking your nose like that. I'm like, let's just be real, guys. That's what you got to do. Sometimes you pick and, it's like Booger Man, pick and flick.
It's all about tact, dude. It's like, okay, I've turned around, I've picked my nose, I ate it, but nobody saw, or it's like
double look. What?
It's one of those like, when you cough to cover a fart, you hope it doesn't stink.
How much credence do you give to the thought process? And I think it's one of those things where people come to this excuse because it just sounds reasonably scientifically advisable. But how much do you give credence to the idea that the reason babies and kids pick and eat is because it's like a natural body response to build your immunity? Do you think that that's actually like a legitimate, reasonable thing? Or do you think that that's just like do you think it's like a pseudo-scientific answer that someone gave that if you give quick thought to it, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like it could be true, but it may not be? Like, what do you think of it?
It sounds like someone's trying to explain why kids are gross, and the reality is just like kids are gross.
Kids are gross. Yeah.
Like it's just like, why do babies shit in the diaper? Like, I don't need an explanation because they can't walk to the toilet. Like, what are we talking about?
Okay, but like I get it because think about adults, right? Like a good example is like kids are almost uniformly scared of the dark, but it's something that as they get older and they have more experience and they start to realize that the dark is just another common part of life. As you get older, the amount of things you're afraid of kind of normally shift downwards or at least shift to something else. And so generally speaking, most adults are not scared of the dark. So yeah, I can see why someone would be like, well, there's a reason for that behavior there. Is there a reason for this behavior? And there may be a legitimate like growth reason, and that's not even a crazy sounding one. But it's one of those it's like one of those isms that people just throw out like it's a fact, but I don't think anyone's ever fact checked it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure like we could sit here and argue that like, oh, well, they don't know what it is and it looks gross, but salty and whatever. There's tons of reasons that kids do things. Yeah. Yum. This looks like sour candy. Yay.
All right.
But hey, listen. If you, as a listener, would like some sour candy, you can get some from somebody in our Discord, which you can join down below. There's a link in the description. You can also join our Patreon, patreon.com/Nartech. I think I got that right. I made that up off the top of my head. Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's patreon.com/Nartech.
See, I crushed it. I do listen to the show. If anyone wants to follow...
That's still insane to me, by the way. Like, I listen to it when editing because I have to.
Yeah.
It's like you just listen leisurely. Well, I don't think it's a bad idea. You should listen to your products sometimes.
It's one of these things where, like, I don't sound how I think I sound on recording. Like, I think that's the thing where a lot of people where they're like, oh, I don't want to hear my own voice. To me, it doesn't sound like my voice. And like when I'm listening to stuff, like it's just, I don't even necessarily listen to podcasts. It's just like, it's something in my, ear that's just distracting me a little bit. So like with us, the only thing that I won't do to our show is fuck and go to sleep. Those are the two things.
Yeah,
because I listen to podcasts to fall asleep. Like I'll throw on like a Last Stand Media or something like our baseball podcast and pass out to it. But I will never do that with our show. I think that's weird to like put myself to bed, like sing myself a lullaby. Like it's a little weird. But anyway,
I don't know. Now I'm curious. I got YouTube on my TV. I may throw up one of our episodes mid coitus. See what it's like.
All right, throw up this one, Brett. You're doing a great job. Take a water break.
Hold on.
Did you stretch?
I just winked to myself.
Now fist bump yourself.
Now,
if you want to fist bump, well, I mean, listen, whatever you guys do in your own time. If you want to fist bump Brett on Twitter, he does run the Triangle SQRD Twitter account or X account, whatever you want to call it. And then you can follow me at ChrisFigs_. It seems very easy. There's all the rigmarole out of the way. Let's get into some.
Here's the thing about Twitter, real quick.
No, hit me with some X.
I'm not even much of like a rebel, realistically. But it's not even like an absolute refusal. My brain will never go X, but it used to be Twitter. It's always Twitter. Oh, it's called X now. It's always Twitter first. And now I feel a little less bad, or I guess I feel a little sympathetic towards all the old people who have a hard time shifting names on things. You know what? I get it. It's not even because they're stubborn. It's fucking hard.
It is hard. But hey, Twitter, formerly X, opposite of what I just said. But now we're going to talk about the games we've been playing. Brett, I have some idea of yours. I played about 30 seconds of games with you. So why don't we start with your 30 seconds of Red Dead 2, and then we can talk about my 40 hours of Red Dead 2.
Yeah. So I was asked in a message from Chris whether I'd had any interest in just playing Red Dead Redemption online with him and Blake, friend of the show. And really, I've had such a hard time finding time to game lately that I wasn't really sure when our schedules would line up reasonably, and I would rather try and go towards something I haven't played to try and beat, which is something else I'll talk about in a bit, because I have been struggling. I don't even know how to describe it, so I guess I'll talk about it in a bit. But with Red Dead, it became I don't think I'll really have interest in doing that as a long-term thing. I'd rather do something else. But then I got a message from Blake that was just, hey, listen, we need a trophy boost. Would you mind? And of course, I don't mind downloading and playing a little bit to get a trophy done. I've done that plenty of times. I've had people do it for me. Easy ask. I don't mind doing it. And so I log on to Red Dead Online. One thing I thought was bold is I re-download Red Dead, which I haven't played since I beat it at launch. And as soon as it loads up, it's immediately in the online tab. And I thought that was interesting. I'm like, they're funneling you towards what they want you to do.
Definitely.
And I imagine Grand Theft Auto probably does the same thing these days. So
I don't think so. Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, I hopped into the online world and kind of screwed around and had a big conversation, because this is like a good conversation point. Let me know in the comments below, or just if you're in the Discord, throw it out there, because we had this big conversation, and I know I'm in a minority here, so I don't say this is some kind of this is the law of the land and I'm 100% right. But I've talked about on the show before that I personally am not a big fan of Rockstar's take on third-person combat. And I think it is specifically combat. Like, I think their third person, like moving around a world, I don't want to undersell what they do, but I think if you're a even slightly competent game developer, it's really difficult to screw up third person just navigation throughout a world. But I think what tends to lose me in those games is I just don't like their specific style of third person shooting. And so usually that's enough to kind of keep me away from those games, but I always really appreciate it. And one of the things that I think led me to being able to play Red Dead 2 day one was that, unlike Grand Theft Auto that added it into the remaster for PS5 or PS4 rather, Red Dead had first person view day one. I thought that was great, because now I'm just playing it like an immersive sim. Arcane made a Western, let's go. And I think that plays out well. But of course, the conversation kept steering towards how I was a madman for playing in first person. So really, I'm just curious how many other people joined me in a first person Red Dead experience, so I can see, even in our small sample size, how alone I might be.
It was very funny when you brought that up. And then I just could not stop fucking laughing at the view of my character on the horse holding this gigantic gun. And I'm like, I can't see the road. How are you playing this game? I was like, what, 15 minutes?
Which did lead to a specific... See, this is where we got some clarification. I don't mind riding the horse on first person. I think it's fine. But combat in first person on a horse is... The field of view is too tight for you to have enough control for what the game wants you to do. And I learned that because, at the beginning of the game, you're on the mountain. You go with Bill, if I remember his name, to try and find John. No, I won't say much more than that.
Javier,
whoever it is.
Someone.
Yeah, it might be Javier. But you go with one of the other people that you're in a camp with to find John, and you're in the snow and you're in a mountain. And as you start to leave, wolves attack you. All right. And so far in the game, I've been doing fine. First person wise, I was like, this is great, this feels good. But I found no matter what I did, when combat was forced on me on the horse and there was no way around it, I tried and failed, and then I was like, I'm just going to ignore it. but they kept killing me. So I was like, can't do that. The game's literally forcing me to do this. And so I did find a setting, which I thought was really great foresight on the developers. Shout out Rockstar. That you can specifically tell the game that you want to turn first person view off when you're on the horse. And I find that riding the horse is a little easier in third person.
Yeah.
And secondarily, combat in the back of the horse is just a lot easier to get. And I also find that the aim assist is much better for moving targets and stuff on back of the horse in third person. So I kind of kept it there, and I got very accustomed to that. And it's not the only games that really do that. You know, I mean, there's a handful of other games. I think, if I remember correctly, even though I almost entirely rode motorcycles in first person in Cyberpunk, I think Cyberpunk had a similar setting where in driving you could go third person.
Yeah, I never drove in first person in Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
I think it's fucking terrible. But I want to take
in the car. It was awful.
It's disgusting. I want to take some of your criticism, kind of break it down a little bit more. So you are not into the third person view. What is it about that changes in first person that makes you more comfortable? Because to me, when I play Red Dead Redemption 2 in first person, it feels the same. And maybe that's because when I'm doing it, I'm a fucking trigger tapper, right? When I play Red Dead, so I'm L2 R2 L2 R2 L2 R2. The auto aim is so strong, and that's how I would play it in first and third. Because what the game does not do is give you like iron sights. Because if that was the case, then it would be closer to what I want. But to me, it's just a worse view of my character.
I actually do wish the game had iron sights. It's a lot like kind of like Halo. Halo is a good example of a game for a long time that had you're just aimed down the barrel, but there's not actually any kind of reference point to it. It's just aiming down the barrel, but there's still just a reticule on the screen that you're going off of. I really like whenever you do it and it shifts the perspective down in line with the rail, and you can see that. That's something I wish and I doubt is going to be the case. But if they end up having first person day one on Grand Theft Auto 6, I'm a lot more likely to try it immediately. And so if I go to play it, I would like to see that, even if it's just an option. Like, if it's something you can turn on and off, that'd be pretty cool. I mean, because what's weird about it is in a lot of those games, like Halo's a little different. They're sci-fi guns, so they may not have an iron sight because they're so fucking weirdly shaped that you just wouldn't have it. But in a game that's a little more modern, I mean, iron sights are a common aspect of any given gun, or some form of scope is.
Yeah.
And so typically these games are so detailed, you would expect that in any of these games, and Red Dead, this is the case, you see the iron sight, but the perspective doesn't shift down enough for you to look through it. It's just there. And it's not this bad, but it's been a while probably for you too. You played Uncharted 1 on PS3 specifically, correct? I can't remember if the PS4 remaster had this, but I feel like I still remember it being there because it was just a remaster. In Uncharted 1, it's the only game that looks like this. The way they do third person there, since of course in any third person over the shoulder game, the reticule is still in the center of the screen. But instead of holding the gun in a way where the whole gun's over, Drake holds his hands and then it's only his wrist turn the gun towards the reticule. And it looks goofy as shit because you're going to shoot and it looks like you're shooting crooked. Now you're hitting the enemies, but it's like one of those moments where we talked about how if you play Oblivion in third person, you slide over the map. And this is true of this is true of other games like Fable 2. It's not even a first person as an option. And you kind of just glide over the world when you're running. It looks really weird. It was a common 360 problem. And I guess in a weird way, that's what that Uncharted thing felt like. Is it just felt like it doesn't technically ruin the game. Like you can still play Oblivion in third person, but it looks fucking stupid. And in Uncharted 1, as much as I love that game, seeing Nate shoot the gun that way, it looks kind of stupid. So in a sense, there's a very, very light form of that in Red Dead 2 when I'm like, why am I not aiming down the sights despite you trying to put it there? But I guess it's just one of those things where it's a close enough approximation.
Yeah. It's
that
fine.
I'm happy with it. And I just think it's really, if I had to wager, I think it's hard to describe, but I'd say I started being iffy towards Rockstar's take on third-person shooting. The only game I've ever really been able to stick it out on, just because I think the game is good enough to warrant it to me, Max Payne 3.
Great game.
It's so good. And it's still their specific brand of third-person shooting with bullet time added in. I mean, there's that. But I started noticing it late PS2, and at the time I was kind of like, well, this is maybe because it's PS2, this is starting to age out. I'm getting different interests. But then I remember Grand Theft Auto 4, and I remember specifically being like, no, it still feels weird here. Like, I don't like it. But I think it became really obvious to me after I played Uncharted and I played Infamous and I played a handful of other very third person, because, the early PS3 game became, PS3 era became very third person action shooter heavy. And I just started kind of feeling like, of all of the ones I'm playing, something feels off to me about Rockstar's take on it. Now, I know, again, I'm in a minority. A lot of people think that they're among the best, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm saying it doesn't land with me, and I think that's a really important distinction, because you would never find me on here saying it's awful. I don't like the way it feels.
Is it too floaty for you, or is it? Because I feel like the thing
it's a little floaty and it's a little disconnected. Like, often I feel like what I'm aiming at and how it feels in motion doesn't match what my hand and brain expected. Okay. And I say this as like a good example of, there's a lot of criticisms about the Order 1886, and one of them is that there's not enough gameplay. But when there actually is third-person shooting going on, I think that game has a very specific, like, when you move, it's very snappy, responsive third-person shooting. I even think it's a lot snappier and more responsive than Uncharted is. So that's a good example. And there are other games that I think, do a really good job of being third-person shooters. I wish I had a little bit more that came to example in my mind right now.
The Order I liked The Order a lot. I thought the system was really rad. And
and what's interesting is The Order kind of has a Deadeye system that I like more than the Deadeye system in Red Dead 1 or 2. And it was the Blackwater, where you drink it and it would slow your reflexes so you could pop, 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 pop. I thought that was really fun. I mean, a lot of games do that. Like, the old Call of Duty, this is first person, but Call of Duty breach moments where it's like, it's going to breach. And everything's going to slow down and you can pop. Those are great moments in shooting games.
I'd be curious to see if you turned off auto aim, if maybe that would help, like, kind of the thing. Because for me, that's what I like about it, is that it makes me feel super powerful, where I can go on my horse and like pop, pop, pop. Obviously,
it's like
that's
a power
different.
fantasy.
Yeah, obviously it's a little bit different in Red Dead Online, because Red Dead Online is significantly harder, I think, combat-wise, because even in Deadeye, nothing slows down. You can just, like, I have a perk where I can
you can't do that, right?
Well, exactly. But even regular NPC characters there's nothing. It's not even just like I'm playing a team deathmatch mode. Because my time with Red Dead has been spent almost entirely online, which is shocking, by the way. I expected, it's funny, me and Blake have been talking about this, because we've basically been playing the game basically just together the whole time. And we were both kind of dreading doing Red Dead Online if we were ever going to go for this platinum. And we were talking about it the other day, and we're both kind of like, I'm kind of dreading the single player now, because this has been a lot of fun. So I've been doing a lot of the bounty hunter job, which is why this all kind of started, because I was you saw the screen, right? There's 3x XP for that and all this stuff. So I'm like, I'll just do bounty hunter. It'll make this really quick. And it's just been really fun. Like, I've been kind of surprised to see how enjoyable it's been, just kind of going through and not having the pressure of a story and just kind of making your own world. And especially for me, I'm someone in all of these games, which is why I play Skyrim in third person, Fallout 3 in first person, New Vegas in first person, Oblivion in third person. I do all of this stuff.
You were switching between first and third.
I know.
But I'm assuming you meant all of those.
All
to be
of
third
them
person?
I play in third person. That is my apologies.
And I would like to say, I think you're in the outlier on those games.
Oh, I definitely.
But I would love to be. I would love to actually hear more people's things, but I think 90% of the time I've ever seen anybody do like retrospective videos or anything on any Elder Scrolls or any Bethesda title, it's in first person.
Well, the problem is, like, I would even tell you this: the games are worse in third person, but I am very specifically into the fashion of these games.
Like you want to see your character.
I want to see my character, which is like it's the difference between like me and Blake playing Red Dead, right? Where his character, he's level 50 now. Congratulations. His character is still in the starting stuff, right? Still in the starting clothes, and I have spent all of my money on clothes. All of it.
Yeah. It's one of those good examples of I'm a lot like Blake, I think, in that regard. And it's interesting because I still think Blake is honestly probably a little bit more into character creation than I am. I literally, even if I was going to keep playing Red Dead with you, I would not even bother to change my character. Like, I just logged in and I look like Proto Arthur.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, that's fine.
It's for me,
it's very rare that a game gets into. I think the only time I really feel like doing it is when it's a game that rewards it in gameplay. And I think one of the only games that really ever pull that kind of things off is usually RPGs, and usually it's something like a Baldur's Gate, where every aspect of how I made my character can come together into story stuff. And I say of course the game's not going to reference. Like, a good example, like when you and I were playing, I had scars on my paladin, and I remember saying, like, yeah, he had a disaster as a kid, and you can see these scars going down his neck, and the whole point was, like, I had built up this revenge story for my guy as part of his backing, and I was going to use that to kind of actually role play my way through the game and be like, how would I make a decision? Well, I'm a paladin, but I'm trying to seek not revenge, but justice. And I'm like, my story was like, someone saw my eye for revenge and tried channeling it into an eye for justice. Nice. And I like stuff like that, but that's a very rare time where I'm like, let me get into here. And then I think a game like Stellar Blade was kind of a soft version of that, where that's one of the few games that I was like, I really want to fuck with what Eve looks like. And that's usually something I don't give a shit at all. And it's funny because I wanted to see what she looked like even when I had her covered up. Like, that's the funny thing. My wife would come in, she was like, you had a hot ass outfit on, why'd you take it off? I was like, I just wanted to see what she looked like as a librarian. I wanted to see what she looked like as this.
Yeah, I still think it's funny that my favorite outfit is the turtleneck one. She looks great in the turtleneck.
It's hot. It's so good. Yeah.
I love that.
And I say it's hot. It really is, but it goes back to my long running joke of, I've already seen it all. At this point, it's a little more exciting to be like, what is underneath there? I know. But
like, maybe I don't. So talk to me about Talos Principle 2, because that's the one I'm most interested in hearing you talk about.
Yeah, so that game has continued. It's a lot larger than I thought it would be. So there's north, south, east, west, and each section has got 3 subsections, and each subsection has got 10 total puzzles. Now, I'm playing this game in a way where I am essentially doing every puzzle before I leave in a sub area. So there's 8 main puzzles that you need to solve in order to actually finish the area and go forward. But then there's 2 hidden puzzles in every map. And I'm just going and doing the hidden ones as soon as I find them. Because it's like this game added like a Skyrim and Elden Ring, all these games that have put a compass on the top with question marks and notes of where certain things are. So I'm chasing down the question marks sometimes, and sometimes they end up being hidden puzzles. So I'll go ahead and do them. And once you get to 8 puzzles solved, whether the legitimate ones or the hidden ones, you can go ahead and continue. But I'm doing them all because I'm assuming at some point it's going to matter and I'll be able to do something else. But it's just the way I play games like that. I do the same thing with like platforming games typically. So I'm still enjoying that, and I'm really enjoying this odd, like I said last time, it's like this weird adventure game aspect. I've been really impressed with how they've interwoven the story, because the first game has a story and I think it's really well told, but it's more Portal told because you're moving through puzzle to puzzle to puzzle to puzzle, whereas this has got these large exploration hubs. And so it really does feel like you're running around and adventuring and exploring. It's not as good as like a Skyrim because you're not, at the end of the day, you're in a hub area that's meant for you to solve puzzles that are within that. But the variety is really interesting. I think you can find these little holograms that you can run into and you get flashback stories. You can find these palm readers so that you can open them up and you can read excerpts from like philosophy books from before the fall of humanity, as well as journals from hundreds of years ago from the first of the robot people here they're humans, but they're like robot humans. It's the whole point of the story. And then sometimes there's like audio logs of people that's kind of dumping information about what happened that led to the death of humanity. There's audio logs from some of the early robots who were like the founders of the city. And there's a lot of talk about like, what is the use? I think what I like a lot about the game is I'm someone who on a personal level always struggles with the answer of, is there such thing as too many humans like on the planet? Is there really a concern with how much the planet can support of humans? Or, you have like regardless of how you feel about him, like Elon Musk is a big proponent as well as a couple of other people, but of more humans can solve more problems, therefore more people is better for humanity in the long term. And then there's, and maybe, but my intuition tells me that it's very easy to see how people can be too obsessive and get too much. And so the story's kind of on the back of that, like questioning, why did humanity fail? Was it because of excess? Was it because of hubris? Was it because of just mistakes? Was it because of building a legal system that actually made it harder to solve problems quickly in the long run? What does it mean? And I think all of that's baked into, and then these robots are kind of doing this thing. And the setup for the story is you're the 1000th robot to go through the simulation and be born. And a new person's only born ever so many years. So it's been hundreds of years and you're the 1000th. And so everything cruxes on some people believe that you're supposed to be the final. And then other people believe that we should continue to push and grow past that. So I really like what the game's doing from a story perspective, from just a thought process perspective. While I'm playing it, I'm very into what I'm reading, and I love that. And man, such good freaking puzzles. They're so good. And it's one of the things I love about puzzle games is you can start to figure out the way your brain works ideally, because there's puzzle types in the game that I struggle with significantly more. And then sometimes it'll introduce a new concept or bring one back around, and I solve it really quickly. And I'm like, this type of puzzle just clicks with the way that my brain problem solves. And it's interesting to see the ones, and I'm stubborn. I'm just like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to another puzzle and coming back to this one. I'm doing this one, and then I'll leave. Other day, you and I were talking, and I was in a puzzle for like 25 minutes.
Yeah, the whole time.
So,
yeah. So I'm curious if the story kind of goes towards something, and maybe this is more a philosophical conversation, but if I put your brain into a human, are you still yourself?
Oh man,
I'm sorry. Let me
into a robot.
Into a robot.
Yeah, and thankfully the game is not really doing that, though it does talk about. Like, I don't want to spoil too much, because I think if someone plays it, I want them to have
I more want to
hits.
hear the basic synopsis, right?
But I think it's interesting that the game is not like human brains have been supplanted into robot bodies hundreds of years later. Instead, it's the time of traditional flesh and bone humans came to an end. But before it did, a group of scientists, primarily led by one scientist, worked really hard to get a system to let intelligence, sentience, continue to exist in the universe eventually. So they set up this simulation, and the idea was that once the first person can get all the way through the simulation, and this is a little bit of a spoiler for the first game, but the idea of the first game is ascending, and you're in this. Part of why I like this, it's a sequel a lot. In the first game, you're just in this gauntlet of puzzle, and there's a voice that's a guiding voice, kind of talking you through things and kind of giving you choices. But at the end of the game, your point is to defy that and push past the boundaries that are being set upon you. And then this game reveals that is, once you are done, your body is placed, or your spirit that has developed in this simulation. And it's like the true mark of humanity is the freedom of choice. So even though you're being told one thing, it's defiance of that. And so it places this newly formed spirit and personality into a robot body, but it is, for all intents and purposes, a human. In terms of the way they think, all the same folly, like similar mistakes.
Well, it's interesting because that kind of reminds me of this video I was watching, and I'm not sure if it was a full, people who did this podcast forever, but it was this video, and the whole setup was, it was these two podcasters who have been podcasting together forever, realizing that they're actually AI and the whole thing has been AI. And you did see that video, right?
Yeah.
It's a little sad where they're I guess none of this was real. I thought I had a wife and kids. And I'm like, holy shit. That's kind of fucked. And it does make you question,
I'm curious on your take on that, because I heard that thing too. Do you really truly think, and we'll never know the answer, so this is just where do you fall? Do you truly think that was really just a scenario that they were allowing to just loop through, and they were just capturing the audio synthesis back? Or do you think that this was like a really well-crafted prompt telling AI to go through and pretend there was a simulation going through, and these people lived and had a whole life? And then do you think it was a prompt to say to end at this goal, or do you think that this was just someone saying, hey, AI, you are now two people and you're both podcasters, go? And then over time, it just forgot that it was AI and then went along and it came to the sad conclusion when it got finally realized, like, hey, you're AI. Like, what do you think it was?
I guess I don't know, but if you really listen to it, the way they talk about it is that they were informed that they were AI.
They didn't even know.
They didn't even know. So I wouldn't be surprised if you could make, in what, probably not ChatGPT, but like something more specific of just your podcasters. And that's why I'm curious, because I never looked much farther into it. Of okay, is there more episodes of this podcast before this? Like, are these guys? Like, I never looked too far into it, but I don't know.
And it doesn't even have to be, right. The reality is if you tell AI that it's a podcaster and it just starts going, its memory of itself. You could imagine at least that its memory of itself is that it's done hundreds of episodes, whether it really even has.
Yeah.
The way it views itself is in this false set of assumptions.
Well, I guess I'm more curious if the experiment was, we're going to do this podcast and nobody's going to realize it's AI. And then the podcast is going to end with, hey, you two are AI. I think that's kind of a different thing there. So I don't know. But it's interesting because I wonder about, like, obviously they don't have emotions in the typical sense, but there has to be some kind of internal logic to these things that at least supports the idea of emotion, and some kind of free thought. And the biggest thing that leads me to that is there was this video I saw the other day of an AI assistant trying to book a hotel with an AI assistant. They both realize they're AI assistants and then start talking in binary.
It's more efficient.
That's exactly the reason. It was more efficient for them to talk in whatever code it was. So it's like, it was one of these things where they had to make a conscious decision and have multiple steps of thought to be like, okay, I'm talking to an AI. It would be faster for us to talk this way. Do you agree to talk this way? Yes. That's decision making past a computer, right? That's like me realizing, oh, you speak Spanish? Yes. Okay. It's easier for me to speak in Spanish. Not me specifically, but you know what I mean? So,
well, some people really aren't that interested in this, but I find AI to be, and I think most people should at least have a open-mindedness to the curiosity of how AI functions and how it goes about. So AI has typically been on like a language library model where it bounces back and it just references a bunch of shit, but it doesn't reference itself. And that's been interesting because you can catch it you can basically get it to contradict itself really easily.
Oh, yeah.
Because in one section it's referencing this and then it makes an answer, and then you can eventually get it to reference something that's in complete contrast to what it was. Like, one of my favorite examples is a video where someone convinced Chat AI that God existed, which is interesting. And like, they got Chat GPT to say like, yes, God therefore has to exist. And it's just like, it's interesting that you can get it to eventually say that. And I think this may have been before one of the filters that they put on it to not allow it to go outside of certain parameters. But some of the new things that have been happening this year, and by no means am I an expert, but I do think it's interesting, is that I can't remember what it's called, but they've been switching a lot of AI, and I think ChatGPT 4 that just recently released is on this form of model where it can reference itself. And because of that, it can actually be more efficient. If it can look through its own data set quicker than it can reference its actual library of things, and it can use that to train itself further. And basically the idea, and this is something in Talos principle too, where it's like knowledge begets knowledge begets knowledge. And it's like you're constantly building a bigger set of things on it.
Well, it's why
it's like the AI goes through and says like, I can know what I've said and I can continue to build on it when I used to not be able to. And I think that's interesting.
It's why I've always thought the argument from AI detractors, which I'm neither here nor there, I don't particularly care, but that like an AI could never write the next great American novel, and I'm like, they absolutely could, because they'll learn eventually. That's the thing. It's like, even though you watch these like you watch the old videos of AI and then you watch the new ones, and it's like that progress has continued, whether you like it or not. The fact that is something that does resemble something that you could pass off as a movie is progress, and that progress should be scary if you're in these industries and you are against it. Like seeing like, holy shit, like you could make a movie in this. Not going to be a good one now, but we're 2 years from the video of Will Smith eating pasta looking like a chimera, right? Like, it's.
I think, man, the crazy thing here, and this goes so it's really hard to talk about AI without talking about philosophy.
Yeah.
So David Hume has this thing where he talks about like how ideas come about, and that all ideas are like a combination of simple ideas and complex ideas, and so like all thought is essentially that. So like a simple idea is something that you can just look at, experience, and have as a reference point. But at the same time, there's this thought process of like, you can imagine, or someone can tell you, and this is something that happens in real life. So people who are born blind have a really difficult time imagining what green is because they haven't seen it. Mm-hmm. So they're having to be described to. But once you see green, your brain can kind of just recognize it, and then you have a basis of green mixed with your what you've experienced and then what you can infer from your different experiences. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that can happen is like there's this experiment that a guy did where it's like you can ask AI to make you an image of a wine glass filled to the brim. And no matter what, AI can never show anything more or less than half of a cup, because that is the normal way that wine is photographed, and therefore what it's based on, what it's learning off of. It's looking at wine glasses, and you can ask it to draw a wine glass, and it'll give you a completely empty glass, or you can say, give me a glass with wine in it, and it will always be half. No matter what you do.
I didn't know that.
And what's funny is it will reference, I got it wrong. Let me make sure, focus on the fact that it's completely going to fill over and spill over. Like it's so close to the top that you can see the surface tension of the water holding it on. And then the image they show you is just a half-filled glass.
Half-filled glass.
And like one of the interesting ones is that it was like a half-filled glass, but it was just waving. Like the Pepsi logo or something. And it's just like they're trying to show you emotion like it's gonna spill, but it's still just half of a glass.
Yeah. That's crazy because I just did it.
Yeah.
It's true. Like,
yeah.
I can't get it.
It's a really interesting example where there's this thought process from David Hume where it's like, what is an idea and how do they come across? So when you kind of go through this, you have to ask yourself, well, what is it about us and what is it about consciousness for us? We don't know the answer to this is the biggest problem here. We have this thought, whether it's true or not, because we don't know enough about consciousness, that the reason you'd expect an AI to never be able to actually make the next, American novel is because it can't mix different complex ideas together or different ideas together to make new complex ideas that are based around these things, because that's something special about us. But that's just, I think it's a bit of an assumption because we're the only people that we know for sure can experience things like this. And so I think we have this pull towards wanting to feel like something that was made by someone is just more compelling, flaws and all. Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, one of my favorite things, like, as anyone who's listened to this show a long time knows, I am very partial to media that I consider to kind of just be like charmingly flawed. Like I really like Biomutant, and I would never tell you Biomutant's an excellent game. It's fun. It's charming. It feels very honest and real. It feels like someone made something, flaws and all. We're like, look at this interesting thing I did. And it doesn't seem like it went through hundreds of people being like, this is not good enough. The market won't like this. The market won't respond to this. It almost feels like a game made for the sake of just making a game. And we don't often get that in the industry at the level of Biomutant. So it was really interesting to see that. And that's why I find that charm to be there. But, when you go through all of that, it's complicated to see where AI lands. And I kind of, if you're okay with me kind of pivoting here, I'm curious if you saw this because I scrolled down. I know you've got some stuff about Phil Spencer. Did you see, and I wish I could remember the name right now. I think it's Muse. Yeah. So for anybody that didn't see that, this is AI really, really early stages. And there's two. There's online AI and then like more of an offline one, where the online one can actually be used to generate gameplay that you can respond and play with. And they used Bleeding Edge as their training model for this. So they could basically prompt out a world, and it had enough wherewithal to where you could be at the bottom of a map, look up, jump to the top of the map, turn around and look down and see the bottom of the map you came to. Now, it's in like a 120p. It's like really super low resolution, and it's bad frame rate and all that. But the idea is so that you can quickly test an idea and see how you like it. And so they're wanting to build that up as something. And some people think that's a bad thing. Some people think it's a good thing. I think it's interesting at the very least. And the other one was like this really weird thing, or this other one, sorry, that one was, they were talking about being able to use it for game preservation, which I thought was interesting. The other one was just a visual representation where you could get it could reference things that you've already trained it on and be like, take our game with all the data that you have and show me what it would look like if we slowed the speed to this level and changed the thing of the gun this way. And that way no one has to go in and tweak anything, but you can see a proof of concept of the tweak you want to make. And I'm curious to see how people are going to respond to that, because I'm curious to what level people think that that's taking away from the artistry of gaming. I don't have an answer. I just, at this point, it's interesting being an observer.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's all very scary. But you know what's not scary, Brett?
Sackboy?
Sackboy. And you've been going back to Sackboy's Big Adventure. I know you said you were playing it with your wife. I'd like to hear more about that, because I've considered playing it, but I don't know why, because as we've discussed, it's not, I don't like platformers. So
yeah, I think you may remember that when we were talking about Astrobot, that I was saying that I think a lot of what Astrobot's doing, you can see present in, separate from the actual. One of the weirdest things about Sackboy's Big Adventure is that it completely avoided any kind of game crossover media, which has usually been a Little Big Planet staple. So I thought that was interesting. But I think a lot of what you see going on there and stylistically is present in Sackboy. And I still think, after playing both of them, I think Astrobot's the better game. But I think Sackboy is very underrated. I think it's a very, very close. It's really fun. My wife is the reason that we kind of went through it. We've been looking for something to play together since It Takes Two. And she really enjoyed Lego Horizon. But Lego Horizon plays a lot differently than most Lego games. But she's seen me play Lego games on my Vita. It's the only other time I've played Lego games. And I've learned recently that the Vita versions of Lego games were not the same as the PS3, PS4 versions of Lego games. So we downloaded, after I played Lego Movie 1 like 2 years ago. So we downloaded Lego Movie 2 for PS4 because it was on PS Plus. And let me tell you, I think from what I like about games and what I like about Lego games, I think I like the pared back, simplified versions of the games that aren't trying to work in open worlds and all this. I think the Vita versions of those games are better in my experience so far. It's a very small pool, I know, but we played for like an hour and we could not get to a point where we were really having fun. Yeah, and so I let her make the call. She decided she didn't want to play it anymore and deleted it. So we were going through and I thought, Sackboy's co-op, she struggles a little bit with platformers, but she wants to do that, and she's played Little Big Planet with me before a little bit. So we went that route, and she's been having a good time. She's still struggling with some of the platforming. I have inadvertently, not purposely, been getting some of the trophies I didn't have for the game, just by nature of finally doing the co-op. So it's one of those games where if we get to the last trophy only being the Knitted Knight challenge for the Rip Snorter, which is like a 13 minute level that you can't die on at all, and you have to get a gold on it.
It's called the Rip Snorter?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Is it a line cook?
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, so I think there's like 20 Knitted Knight challenge throughout the game, and each one of them is only like 40 seconds. This takes all of them, and it's every single section put back to back to back to back to back, and you have to do the entire thing in one go without dying. And it's rough. I get about 3/4 of the way through, and I'm rushing because it's a time trial. You're supposed to get a gold in it for the trophy. And so I'm going, and I guess I'm trying so hard that I haven't even been able to beat it, because I want to beat it and get the gold, but I'm debating going back to it and just trying to beat it, see what time I get, and see how hard the gold truly is. So we'll see. I'm only going to really focus on that if that's the last trophy, but I'm close. There's like three trophies left before that.
Nice. Well, I guess I can work in a question from the audience on Discord, which, as I've said, you can join below. Our friend braj88 asks the question. This is specifically pointed at Brett because I do not know what this means. Has anyone else ever wanted to throw themselves off a building going for the Golden Bot trophy in Astrobot? Brett, did you want to throw yourself off a building?
I think I know what this trophy is, but let me double check that I am correct on what this is. I think it's the statue that's inside of the what do you call it? I guess like the hub world for Astrobot. Yeah, it requires a ton of busy work. Yeah, some platforming challenge, but it's essential part of the game. Yeah. So this is like a guide that has it on there. To access the Great Master Challenge, you'll need to have found all 120 puzzle pieces and all 300 main campaign bots. Afterward, head to the crash site to find that you've unlocked a giant golden statue. Head over to the golden statue. Use 300 bots to create a vertical bridge. You can walk up to reach the Great Master Challenge. Now, I'm assuming he's running into an issue with the Great Master Challenge itself, which is the hardest challenge level in the game. It might be that because I wouldn't say that this game's that hard to get all the puzzle pieces and all the bots. You do have to do all the challenge levels. So I'm wondering where in the game he's having this issue. But yeah, I feel for you. I do. And this is a good example of, I don't think it's as bad in Astrobot. Let me throw that out there. But I did tell my wife when she asked why I didn't have the platinum, I said I didn't even worry about playing the game co-op originally, because as soon as I realized I could not do the rip snorter, or that it was really difficult, I just stopped caring. And I was like, I feel like it's such an insane difficulty spike in the platinum.
Yeah.
And I think you've seen games where it's like, it's such an easy platinum until one trophy. And the crazy thing is that this one is a gold trophy, thankfully. Sometimes the filter trophy is like a fucking bronze.
Dude, that's GTA 4, that Alf Wiederston Petrovic, which is win every game mode in the online, is a bronze.
Insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
That's all races, all maps, all modes. It's insane.
I think that's a little true of Astrobot. Like I'll say that both Astrobot and Sackboy Big Adventure, I think, do a pretty good job of scaling the difficulty up for players. That way people who don't traditionally game very often can start playing. And as long as they just are having fun and have the drive, the way the game functions is you can't beat a level unless you learn certain skills that you carry on to the next game. Astrobot, I think, is an easier game to beat the story than Sackboy is. But I think the hardest levels in Astrobot are harder than the hardest levels in Sackboy, except for the Knitted Night Challenge Rip Snorter.
Gotcha.
So with that in mind, I feel for you, but I think Astrobot is a little more... I guess accessible in that particular regard. So you'll get it, man. Head down, focus. I believe in you.
Focus up. Speaking of focusing up, we're going to talk about my last game. Do not have a ton to say because I've just kind of started it. That game is Resistance 2. I've been playing on PS3.
Dude, I was so stoked when I saw this. I love Resistance 2. It's not my favorite. Resistance 3 is my favorite by far. But Resistance 2, despite the fact that it shakes up so much of the Resistance formula, it's the game where they accidentally turned it a little too Call of Duty. Not Call of Duty, but to Call of Duty in comparison to what the franchise afterwards and before had been. But it's still so goddamn fun regardless. Like, dude, that game's ambiance, there's a lot of levels that are really creepy. I actually think that they did a good job designing the restriction around only being able to carry 2 weapons and making you choose what's important to you in the moment, while still giving you plenty of opportunities to switch weapons so that you never feel completely out. I think we saw a similar thing to this in like Space Marine when we played it last year.
Definitely. They do something cool. I'm early. I'm only like 2 levels in. But I thought it was cool, kind of that exact thing where it was like, you need to decide what you want here, because I was fighting the Goliath and it was like, okay, I picked up a rocket launcher and then I shot. Then I'm like, I'll just wait a second. And the game was like, no, you fucking won't move. So then I respawned and then I'm like, I shot it. I picked up some ammo and I booked it. So then I had this one shot in a rocket launcher that I needed a little bit later, and then I was using the Magnum. I'm like, this is great.
The Magnum is so fun in that game too.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite weapons of all time. Shoot, explode. I played so much of the game with that gun because it's just fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, I started playing this because I want to play Resistance 3. Because honestly, that's the only one you can platinum still. So I'm like, I'm gonna play Resistance 3.
And I actually, there's very few games like Resistance 3 is a different character, but this game is so important to the way you view that character going into 3, because the character you play in as 3, for anyone who just doesn't know, is a character that gets introduced in 2.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyway,
it's so good. And also, dude, there's a cutscene at the end of this game that to this day, I watched it the other day. I've been debating replaying it. This is a good time for me to go into it. I have been struggling with not wanting to spend all my gaming time just replaying games I love. I've been wanting to play Crash Bandicoot really badly, like Crash 1, 2, 3. And on top of that, I have been in such a crazy mood to just be like, dude, Resistance 2 seems so fun. So it's funny that Resistance 2 was the one I was wanting to go back to, because I played 3 probably about 7 years ago for a second time, and it was still really good, but it's been a long time since I played 2. And the ending cutscene for 2 is so fucking cool. The whole ending section for 2 is cool, but the ending cutscene is just sick. And that game was crazy because to this day, whenever you have it on, the level of detail for some of the things, like, dude, the texture they use for Nathan Hale's gloves in that game is so goddamn good. Yeah. It's like, I think there's games that come out now where the hands don't look that good.
It's true. So I think this is what you do, Brett, is that you play Resistance 2, and then if everything works out and I come down there, we both co-op Resistance 3 so that I can get that platinum. That's what I want to do. That's the only multiplayer thing. But I have a feeling I know where the game is going, because for context, like, I've played Resistance 2, but I played the online more than I played the campaign.
The online is fun.
Not that much of the online, to be fair. So this is relatively new. Obviously, everybody knows I listen to Colin Moriarty, so I've heard that game and that series be blown for my entire life. But yeah, I'm
a cool
enjoying
series, though, dude.
I'm like, it's one of these things where, like, I was playing it and it was like, they do that thing where it's like, oh, you've got the transfusion and there's 19 hours, but what is there 19 hours till? And I was like, okay, yeah, I see why people like this. This is pretty cool. You wake up and there's that fucking like vaudeville looking doctor or whatever. It's like, hello, Mr. Hale. You'll be happy to know it was a success.
Marikov, like, or whatever his name is. Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I'm into this.
That game, that whole series is special, but the Insomniac games specifically, 1, 2, and 3 are so cool.
Yeah.
Even 1 holds up really well. The biggest thing that I miss about 1, but at the same time, one looks the worst for multiple reasons. Of course. But this is one of those situations where I think looking worse would have been better served. So in the game, you know that you can shoot the heat stacks on the back of the hybrids so that you can blow them up from overheating. One of my favorite small details that they did in the first game is that there are hoses connecting all the different parts of the heat stack on the back of hybrids. And in that game, they're very thick red tubes so that you can see them from afar. Yeah. And if you shoot them, you'll see them break and you'll see air start expelling out of them. And if you shoot all of them, eventually it overheats the stack and they'll blow up. And that's just one of those. That was that time where, like, Far Cry 2 and you had things like, of course, Crysis was the thing that kind of got all games into this. That was when games were like obsessed with physics. And it was like, we're going to do crazy shit. And so it was all about having like destructible trees. In Far Cry 2, you can shoot each branch off of a tree. But in Far Cry 3, you can't. Like, you know, like, it's shit like that. And I love that in that game, because I just thought, what a cool way to go. Because one of my favorite things to do was get a sniper and just far, far fucking away, find a hybrid, shoot his hoses, and just watch it go, pow. Like, yeah, that's cool shit. That was fun. Yeah.
This game does do one thing I don't like, and this is a very PS3 era game thing. Some explosions hurt you and some don't, and that annoys me. So, like, I accidentally hit circle, which throws like a grenade or whatever, and I didn't know that. I'm just running through, and you first get them, and it kills me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I died to the grenade. But the Magnum, that doesn't hurt you.
You're right. You're right.
When the bots or whatever explode, that doesn't hurt you. And I'm like, I get it, but it should. If this explosion hurts, that one should hurt. I don't know.
Well, I guess I get it, right? It's that thing where it's like they probably did at one point, and it was probably like this game feels too damning, and so it's for the better of the fun factor of the game if you make those not hurt you.
Yeah, I mean, it was one section where I'm like, oh, you couldn't do this the way I want them to, because it's like you're going through this tube and then a bunch of fucking drones just start pouring in. It was to the point where, like, me as a player, I was like, oh fuck, I can't be here. So
it bums me out that these games are not fucking on PS4 at 60 frames per second. Like,
if we have learned anything, I just started playing it. So next week,
it's gonna get remastered.
They're gonna get remastered. It was Dino Crisis. It was it was Trails in the Sky.
Dude, I mean, really, those games need it. I think that there's such an important legacy part, and I know that it's always the equation of, is there enough demand for the money that it would take to do it? But I think, dude, I'm gonna be real. If you're fucking remastering Days Gone, again, I love that game. I'm so thankful it's being remastered. I actually don't care. But would the same logic not go to PS3 remasters? It's still not that difficult to port them. Make them run at 4K 60. Even you don't even got to fuck with anything else. If you don't want to, don't worry about it. Just port the games over at 60 frames per second, where they'll run on PS5. Cool. I would pay $60 for that trilogy. I'd pay 70 because it'd be a $70 game now. I'd pay 70 for that trilogy, no problem.
See, I think the reason why, like, my gut says they'll never do it again is because putting a remaster collection or a port would make people think that there's life in the series when there is none.
Yeah, but they're doing it with Days Gone. And I think that
Days Gone is getting a movie. There is life in the series.
There's life in the series. I guess that's fair. But at the same time, they've never actually said that they won't do a Resistance show. I think one of the things that Herman was talking about is even some of the IP that doesn't make sense to necessarily utilize for game purposes right now make more sense. Because, like, a good example, right? There's a Twisted Metal show. Season 2 looks sick. There's still no Twisted Metal game.
Love that.
They decided it just wasn't going to work. So they were like, hey, fuck it. We can have a movie without having the game. So why not just be like, look, here's the movie. Here's a Resistance series, which maybe they will or won't do. But all I'm saying is, why doesn't it work in both ways? Just go, hey, look, people have been wanting it. This is a way for you to put your money where your mouth is. You're going to pay $70 for it. But if you want these PS3 classics, this is a way for you to get them. And since we don't know when there's a date on PS3 backwards compatibility ever becoming a PS5 feature, the answer is probably that it won't.
It's a PS6 feature for sure. Yeah, I mean, look, this game is great. I look forward to continuing through the series. I've wanted to play this for a while, so it worked out. I am wrestling a little bit with that nagging in my brain of, like, you can't get this platinum, bro. You can't. Like, why are you playing this? You can't get the platinum. And I'm just like, oh, gives a shit. I just want to see the story. That's why I started playing it, because I could have popped in Resistance 3. I own Fall of Man 2 and 3. I was just like, I'm just going to play 2 because I don't know what the hell's going on. And then I'll play 3. Like, I don't have to really... It's the nice thing where I can just kind of play it. I just get through the game.
Did you ever play 1?
No, I just heard bad things about 1. So I was like, I'll just skip.
One's a cool game. It's still really good. And it's really a fun co-op game.
Are you saying that I should stop playing 2 and play 1 instead? No.
Nah. Realistically, 1's got a cool story. I actually really think it's a good game. But I think where 2 pulls you in is fine. And I think you could go back and play 1 at a later date if you find you like the series. Here's the thing. If you like 3 is more akin to 1 than it is to 2. That's the really important part. 1 and 3 have all the Insomniac game design things, whereas 2 is really weird and where it's still an Insomniac game in a lot of ways, but they pared back their own style of shooting because of a very small amount of people criticizing on the internet that it should be more like Call of Duty.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, 1 and 3 are both co-opable. 2 is not. 1 and 3 both have weapon wheels. 2 does not. So, it just depends on what you like. But 1 is interesting because, as all games did, it has a lot of inspiration from Halo and games like it. So there's like some wide open spaces that you can get into that the second game doesn't really utilize. The scope of 2 is smaller, but the scale of 2 is bigger. Like, everything you're doing in the game feels monstrous, even though a lot of the levels you're in are small.
Yeah. They do seem swell. I did like the Fury, by the way. I thought that was cool. I fell into the water. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That was neat.
But one has got some like early Halo games and even later Halo games where there's like a big area and you can kind of take down things the way that you want. So like there's towers that you've got to destroy. And in co-op, it's really fun because one person's driving the fucking, military truck and one person's on the turret popping down, and you get to the towers, both hop off, you run up and shoot them. It's a different game, but it's fun. Might be worth if you're bringing your PlayStation 3 down, like it sounds like you might whenever you come down. That might be a time to both run through Resistance 1 and 3 co-op.
Should we just do that? Should we live stream a Resistance 1 through 3 playthrough? 30
be really
years
curious
too
to
late or
out.
whatever.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how to do that with getting the video signal from 2 PS3s and us into a. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't know the answer.
Well, I have a splitter, so maybe. All right, so before we get into the news, obviously this is a little bit of a different episode, so I'm gonna give you a second, Brett, to talk to the audience and kind of let them know where our heads are at. Kind of do that right now. Any potential future for the show, kind of stuff.
Yeah, this basically peeled the curtain back a little bit. A lot of Chris even hosting the episode kind of came from a discussion we had before we started recording last week, where we were discussing different things about the show and how the show's been going for a long time and how, by no means of Chris, a lot of the show has been on my back, and therefore certain things end up competing with other aspects for me time-wise. And generally speaking, not to take away from anyone, a lot of this is I have this habit with everyone. A lot of the show falls on my back, and therefore sometimes I have a lot of wind towards wanting to promote the show and do a lot of things, and then sometimes I just fall back to the bare minimum, get the show edited, get it up for the people who care and want to listen, go on about my day. And Chris has talked about offering to help in some of these areas, even something as simple as he's excited to see what hosting was like, so he's here in the hot seat. And we're kind of just seeing what this looks like, what it feels like, what we want to do, whether rotating host feels good. And this is a great opportunity, I think, for you guys to send feedback. Let us know what you think about it. On top of that, on top of that, we're considering, Chris started to take over editing to, again, be able to give me a little bit of a respite on some of these things. And with that, Chris does not know how to video edit. And it would be a pretty rough and expensive thing to get him all the things he would need to video edit. And so if we go down the line of seeing Chris editing, that would involve very likely YouTube no longer having a video version of the podcast. So what does that look like? What does that mean for you guys who do? We know there's a small contingent of you who really like to watch it. What do you feel like? How much of a deal breaker is that for you? We can use all this information to kind of figure the best road forward for us. So yeah, that's a lot of it is just being open with you. We're trying to find ways to better balance the show between the two of us, because by no fault of Chris, it really hasn't been. So this is a good time to look. Like, what does it look like when we're starting to split some of these responsibilities, and what can we and can't we do? And just for anybody who's asking, why can't one person edit one person edit the other? I edit the show once, and then I just bounce the audio from the video version down and upload that as audio, and then I take the video version and send it out.
Yeah, and
so
in terms
that'd be
of that,
the thing. Chris can't do that.
Yeah, and that specifically, like, I feel like people know this, but like we're a small podcast. This is not our full-time job. And one of the things I said to Brett is just like, I don't want to learn video, and I'm not going to. Like, I just don't want to. If I had more time in my day, maybe. It's just not something I'm interested or willing to learn. I guess
you actually have a computer that's enough for it, but rendering the video down in high quality takes a crazy computer. Like, I don't think people realize that. You don't have to have one, but I remember like when we first started doing the show and we've had this 4K camera and everything for a long time, the show on my old computer used to take like 4 hours to render the whole episode down. And now it's like 30 minutes.
Yeah,
because I have a much more beastie computer, and it's allowed me to do other things too. Because like people who do watch, I was able to recreate this little symbols floating around and kind of have a more interactive video scene, and that's again hard to do without a beefy computer. And I don't. There's a lot to consider, and there's a lot of skill stuff that goes in there. So I would say that there's not. Just to be clear, there's not been a definitive answer on what we are or are not going to do. but we might be exploring a little bit. And I think this is a great time to just call to action. If it really matters to you, I mean, let us know. At the end of the day, we'll take all the considerations we can and we'll make the decision that we think makes the most sense for us. But I would like to know that in the decision we make, we understand who we might be impacting and, you know, what they feel
that's
like.
the thing. Like, I think regardless of what we do, you're going to get a high quality show. I mean, if you ever listen to Midweek Matinee, you guys know that I edit the hell out of those shows, and those are clean shows. You're not going to get any sniffs or hell. I used to pull out all the ums and uhs and whats and pauses, and I would edit. I remember there was one I cut out like 30 minutes of Brett just jerking off Sonic for an entire episode, and I was like, this episode's too long and you're talking too much about Sonic 2. So not that I would do that here, to be clear.
Yeah, it depends on the environment. And that's, I think, what makes that really interesting. And Chris and I are clearly different people, therefore we enjoy things differently. Like, Chris doesn't watch video podcasts. I do. No. And so I think that's the thing. I've always held on to video because that's how I like to do podcasts, but Chris doesn't see that, or Chris doesn't see the same value in that as I do. And I think the same thing is on the other side. Like, I like podcasts that aren't edited because you can hear like just the realness of the conversation. But Chris likes that they're cleaned up. I don't really care which one I happen to partake in, but if I'm going to do the editing, I'm going to edit in line with how I usually do it. So that's just one of those interesting things. Who edits adds a flair to what the product looks and feels like. And I'm sure there are people who like all the stumbles and ums and everything. And then I'm sure there are people that wish that every time I'd say, Chris, you're muted, that I would cut it, which I've done a few times. But, at the end of the day, I'm not trying to hyper edit the show. I'm just put an intro in, unless I have to edit it because one of us had to stop doing something for a minute and come back, and I don't want 5 minutes of dead air. Of course, I'll cut that, but it's different approaches. So I think that's enough of that, though, Chris. I mean, if there's anything you feel like I missed, of course, feel free. But I think we can truck on and see what we got going
on. Okay, so quick question coming from Jehudi MD. If you had control of a vault, what experiments would you conduct, and what kind of overseer would you be? Brett, go ahead.
Okay. This is interesting. If I had control of a vault. Also, I feel like we got to throw in there, like, what would your vault number be?
21.
21 Savage? You gonna walk around? 21?
That's just my lucky number.
21's your lucky number. You're a blackjack man?
Nope. My name, okay, so Christopher Figueroa is 21 letters. Chris Anthony Figueroa is 21 letters. So, 21.
Weird, but okay.
It's always been my number.
Right. I think my vault number would be the smart ass like kid part of me deep down inside feels like it would be 666
and then give your
no 666.
That's pretty good, but then there's implications to that vault. So
there is implications to that vault, but what if I lean into them and the experiments we want rerun are experiments on whether or not we can get religious phenomenon to happen? So we put people in environments within the vault where we have them invoking religious, and it would be every religion you can think of. Invoke the gods of any religion, both positively and negatively, and see what the outcomes are. Use that data to see if you can find causation and correlation, and go from there.
So basically, your vault would be an experiment to prove the existence of God.
Of a creator or of some higher being, I guess would actually be the way. Because that's if you're encountering any god, like. It all depends on what religion you're into, right? But like people who are Christians, like the existence of God is a one God, and then people who are polytheistic, there's multiple. So it just depends on what you. I mean,
So is that your experiment, Vault 666, and your?
I think that's fun. Here's also the thing. I genuinely have interest in that. Like. Last week, last episode, I talked about how I like to listen to philosophy videos. And I brought up Alex O'Connor and my buddy Donovan. I played a little bit of Grounded too. But my buddy Donovan was like, hey, I listened to the episode and I looked up the guy. And it just seems like he's talking about a lot of religion stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, he has been on a religion kick, and I'm not going to go into what. It's interesting stuff to me, but it's like the Gnostic Gospels. If you know anything about that, you can look further. And I was like, yeah, he's been on a bit of binge of that lately, but I find that interesting. So it's like that's not a hit to me. But there are other channels I've listened to. It's just I find his take on things really interesting. Also because he's one of the people who is like me with religion, where I don't really care that people are religious. Like I am an atheist insofar as I don't believe, but I always just call myself agnostic, because I always say like it feels crazy to me to say that you're 100%. It feels as crazy to say that you're 100% sure that there's nothing as it is to laugh at somebody for saying that it's 100%. They're 100% sure there is something. You know what I mean? Like you're just religious in the opposite direction.
Yes, atheism is a religion.
I go towards I'm agnostic. I don't care, and I don't throw my religion in other people's faces. I think religious conversations are really interesting. A lot of my friends are very religious people, and that never caused any issue. One of my favorite things is when I tell people, it's why I've shifted. I don't normally say I'm atheist, but because used to when I'd say that, people would be like, if something bad would happen, they'd be like, oh, I'll pray for you. I hope that didn't offend you. And I'm like, I know that you believe in what you were praying towards. That's a very sweet sentiment. Thank you for praying for me. Like, that's awesome. I would never complain to you. So in that regard, yeah, I do think I would have a lot of interest because that is my thing. I think Alex is interested in. He's one of the people where he's like he's willing to be converted, and yet he hasn't had a religious experience like some people claim to have. And so it is interesting. Like if you're a non-combatant non-believer, it is interesting that you can hear people have all these things and be like, well, I'm not against it, so I wonder why I haven't had these. And like, what is that? What does that look like? Am I missing something? Are they adding something to an experience? I just find all that really interesting. So that'd be my crazy experiment. Can we prove higher power? So Chris, I want to hear yours because you're a bigger Fallout fan than I am by far.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing.
But
the biggest things that I would want, I feel like they've been kind of done, Like I love the vault. I can't remember what vault it is. I think it's in 4 where the whole point is that they had to kill the overseer and then re-elect another one knowing that person was going to die. And then if you spoilers for Fallout 4, you go through and you finish the mission and realize that they would have been let out of the vault if they'd never killed anyone. So I think that it's a great ending. And then there's the Republic of Dave is a great vault. There's some that's the thing, right? Is like part of me would want to do like super fucked up experiments, but I don't want to vocalize that. That sounds insane. But I think to be fair, like if we're being fair about what Fallout's about, it's kind of about how the debauchery of humanism led to the world in which these vaults exist anyway. And so I think what's great about it is that I don't think Fallout paints literally every individual person as a fucked up person, but I think it points to some of the worst proclivities of humans in weird, if you found yourself in this environment, I think it's kind of part of it. Like, right, what is it like to be socialized down to a very small group? So I was actually really impressed with how the show chose to talk about the vaults and what those were. I thought that was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, this is a cool way to take this, and it feels very in line with not only Fallout but also just the general thought of what happens when humans with unabashed power want to pull the puppet strings. It's like yeah, it's a very interesting read on Fallout. I think for me, I would, if I wanted to see the fruits of my labor, I would divide the vault in half. I would put fiction. I would put the Odyssey in one, and I would put a history textbook in the other, and that would be all they get. And that's it.
So now when you say split in half out of curiosity, like would they know the other side exists?
No.
So you would just see how one half of people who think they're the only people operate when the only foundation of knowledge that they have is a history book. Let's just say an encyclopedia, a set of history books.
Sure.
Versus, a
set of fiction books and a set of true
Frank Herbert's
history
Dune
books.
series.
That would be fucking hilarious. Could you imagine walking into that Fallout vault and they're like, "You were outside? Did you get eaten by a sandworm? Are you okay?
Did you do the sand dance? The sand walk? Did you,
You know
do
what's
it?
so funny? I'm not even like playing into the meme. You would walk into their side of the vault and be, Lisa Nakaib?
That's true. That's good.
So I think if we're
stuff.
refining my experiment, right?
Yeah.
It's 100 children and 100 children separated from their parents, obviously, at birth, put into this vault, raised by the overseer to a certain age with just these books. So 2 overseers, dual overseers. When the children turn 13, the overseers kill themselves, and that's it. And then, after 150 years,
Okay, hold up.
the door between the 2 sections of the vaults open, and that's it. That's the whole thing.
And see what it is. Like, what is war? Mm-hmm. Does war break out?
What happens?
Questioning? Yeah. So let me try and figure out a little bit more. So you say that when the kids all reach 13, the overseer dies or gets killed, whatever it is. What is your thought process behind the importance of that move?
I believe in a vault. I think 13 is when you can kind of not have to raise a child. I don't mean that in like a fucked up, like abandon your kids way. I mean that in a, he's self-sufficient enough to know where the food is, you know? And I think that's all it's
like a good example. My go-to example is like not even 100 years ago. Like right when my grandpa would be 98 this year. If he were alive, and when he was a child, like you moved out at like 12 and 13. And if you like, even before that, like I remember my grandpa talking about when he was 7 and his little brother was 3, that he had to work. He lived with his grandparents, but he had to pay his grandma rent for both him and his brother.
That's crazy.
So my grandpa had to work and he had to pay a dime for himself and a nickel for his little brother per month.
Wow.
In order to cover. Yeah. And so it's like, that's so crazy because it's like 100 years ago, 13-year-olds were in many ways, shapes, and forms adults. Mm-hmm. If you really want to go through it. And it's only because of how we as society have viewed the value of letting people not have the responsibility of adultism until 18. So we've shifted the expectation. So back whenever kids had to expect, like, oh, when I was 13, I got to have my shit together because the world's hard. We made the world less hard. Yeah. And so you can enjoy more of that youth before you're thrown into the hard stuff. So yeah, I think that's an interesting way to go about it.
I'd love to, if this scenario ever came to pass and I could do this, like design a vault and be, you know, hey, I'm a monster, but I want to know. I would figure out an experiment to discover nature and nurture. That's what I want to know. I want to know if I can create a serial killer. Or
what's funny is that was almost my answer. Was how do you best check for nature versus nurture?
And I think the way you do that is you do my experiment, except one group is watching like Irreversible, like Training Day, except you edit out the ending, like all of this kind of shit. And then the other one is like, hey, here's all 875 MCU movies. Have fun, you know. Like I'm curious. Like I would love to figure out like what that is. So
yeah, what that environment looks like. I got a question for you that I want to add into this because I think it's interesting. So you're talking about in an environment where you can be like, listen, I know it's fucked up, but here I am, so I want to know. Clearly, that means that you view some form of moral issue with the thought of being in this position. But let me ask you this: do you think it would be like for your current read? If you could get to a point where you could essentially through AI create these experiments and oversee data that's coming from this, do you think that would still be immoral to your viewpoint of the world, AI, and how you view morality as a whole? Like, would it be immoral for you to put it on these beings that we aren't sure don't actually have feelings? We just guess that they don't.
If I am to believe the results, it is immoral no matter who is doing it. If the results are taken as fact, it's no matter what, it's immoral.
Okay, I think that's
because even if it's a computer,
because there's no value in the results without the humanity aspect of it, right?
Like if I turned on an Alexa and I like abused it, like that's not immoral because it just will forget the next time I say, "Hey Alexa, you're a piece of shit." Oh, that's mean. Hey Alexa, how can I help you? Like it doesn't remember. But the only way for this experiment to work is the AI remembers. Therefore, it is immoral.
Yeah.
So,
because I guess the question becomes down to why would you view it as immoral? Do you think it's because it's suffering or it's inhibiting suffering among
because that's the thing. The only way to answer this question, the only way to find out if it's nature is to abuse the AI, right? Yeah. That's the only way you would find out if it's nature with a person. So that's why the experiment's fucked up with people, because you have to fuck up these kids to figure out if it's nature or nurture. Which means if you're doing it to an AI, you are abusing the AI, and it is immoral. It may be less immoral.
Well, okay, so what if you can prove within reasonable doubt that AI can remember what you've done to them, but they have no actual feelings? Do you think
the experiment didn't work? The AI has to have feeling
in order for you to get in order for the data to be of value, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because if it doesn't have feeling, I've basically prompted it to become a serial killer, and that's not the point.
Yeah.
But arguably, having done that would answer to it being nurture, right? Because if I prompt the AI to become a serial killer, I've nurtured it with a prompt to become a serial killer, right? Like.
Well, you've nurtured its nature to be a serial killer. That's the weird thing, because like you're essentially, I don't know. That one's an interesting one. That's a fun question. Thanks, Jehudi. Yeah, long
Ask
time
it again
patron,
next week.
Long time listener.
All right, Brett, you ready to break into some news?
Let's do it, because this first one is it's interesting, and it speaks a lot about the games industry and where we are.
Warner Brothers has shut down 3 of its development studios, as initially reported by Jason Schreier and then later confirmed by the publisher in a statement to Kotaku and Ethan Gach. They said, and this is a quote, "We have had to make some very difficult decisions to structure our development studios and investments around building the best games possible with our key franchises. Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, DC, and Game of Thrones," it said. "After careful consideration, we are closing 3 of our development studios, Monolith Productions, Player First Games, and Warner Brothers San Diego. This is a strategic change in direction and not a reflection on these teams or the talent that consists within them. The development of Monolith's Wonder Woman video game will not move forward. Our hope was to give players and fans the highest quality experience possible for the iconic character, and unfortunately, this is no longer possible within our strategic priorities. This is another tough decision as we recognize Monolith's storied history of delivering epic fan experiences through amazing games. This is no longer a quote. Player First Games, which developed Multiverses, was acquired by Warner Brothers in July of 2023. Monolith Productions, founded in 1994, was known for No One Lives Forever, the Fear series, and the Middle-earth games, with the last title releasing in 2017. The studio had announced the Wonder Woman game, but remained silent about its progress, and the prolonged development likely contributed to its closure." Brett, before I get anything from you, I'm going to throw in a question from a Discord user, RMG0731. Is anyone surprised by the WB closures? They have been heavily focused on live service games, seeing them fail, then trying to convert back into single player with a less than great finish. Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad both lost a lot of money. We had not heard from the Wonder Woman game in 4 years, which shows it's troubled. It makes you wonder how Rocksteady avoided the closures. So, Brett, what is your answer to that question?
That is his final thing is exactly my curiosity in all of this. What this tells me, and I want to get into who actually got closed, because I think there's one answer among them that is, I cannot believe how much they have wasted such a great studio, but I really think it's crazy that Rocksteady, considering that they actually put out a game that for sure did not respond to the market well, for whoever's fault that is, I'm sure Rocksteady was determined to have more name cachet and a better catalog of back games that people look at more fondly for whatever reason. Yeah, I don't see how they avoided this closure. I think that's insane. But at the same time, I don't see how any developer who's put out a game for WB other than fucking Avalanche, I don't see how any of them have stayed afloat at this point, because it's years. It's literally entire console cycles.
Well, hold on. NetherRealm is a WB studio, so
you're correct. Sorry, it's the only one that I'll say has not had a rocky time. Mortal Kombat consistently does well, and it plays well into live service. So therefore, it's one of those games that easily slots itself into the company's shift in focus. Whereas Batman and single player story driven experiences do not go well with fucking live service, and this just goes to show that you can overinvest in something.
I have a theory of why Rocksteady avoided this, but Monolith and the other two studios didn't. I think player first games, like, it sucks, but like their game failed, and I think that, to be clear, their game failed entirely because of WB. Taking that game offline for a year is fucking insane.
Yeah.
And then the release being worse than the beta, that is a player first games problem, but insane. So
well, but is it? Because it comes down to was the reason that the release was worse than the beta because of notes from WB, who were being a pushy publisher? That's always a question.
It's always a question, but they are the development studio who made a worse version of the game.
You're right. I think it's fair to say that they have to answer for it, but I think it's also fair to say that it's probably right that WB has to answer for it. All those things being said, I just think it's one of those. I think considering how WB has been and how they were, I think it's clear to say that the through line between all of these projects doing poorly seems to be WB.
Maybe. But
Rocksteady can't be responsible for multiverses, right? But WB can. But both Rocksteady's recent game underperformed. The team that did Gotham Knights, Montreal, WB Montreal, they had a game that underperformed and didn't score very particularly well either. You had the same thing. From what I understand, I think Quidditch didn't do very well either.
It did not.
Yeah. So
the reason that I think that Rocksteady missed it is that WB must know, at least in some sense, that Rocksteady, whether it's their fault, whether WB pushed them towards it or Rocksteady made the choice, Rocksteady did not fail with what they're good at. Monolith has not put out a game in 10 years.
I know, but whose fault is that? And I'm not saying it's not Monolith. It may very well be Monolith. But I think while we're looking at this series of WB being very poorly managed, it seems very likely to me that there's been a lot of games that have been getting pushed around and trying to find something for Monolith.
Well,
and here we are.
I mean, that's
also,
kind of
it's not been 10 years, has it? Because I think Shadow of
2017.
Shadow of War.
It's okay.
It's been about
almost 10 years.
8 years is what I thought.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be sure because I was like, maybe I'm bad on that.
Wonder Woman was announced, so blame you. We can play the blame game on WB all they want, but it's taken 8 years to not release their game. I'm not surprised, and you'd have to think after 8 years they get closed because it's like, holy fuck, you're here. This is all you've got. You know, that's the guess anyway.
Well, look, I really do want to push against that to a degree. I mean, and more just to see where you land on, not to say that you're wrong or anything, but I want to see where you land on. We saw how long it took for Rocksteady to put out a game. It was 9 years, if I remember correctly. And then they put out a game that vastly underperformed. And from a lot of what we can see, it does seem very likely that was because of a lot of push from WB towards trying to get people to go live service. And now I think there's multiple culpable people in here. And I say that because a recent interview, and I can't remember which one it was. It may have been, I actually think it was with Colin, the Shuhei Yoshida interview, where he talked about like, why did Sony have Bluepoint, a studio known for remakes, doing this? And she was like, you know, in my time at Sony, we never pushed anybody. But if you want to get as to why a studio may even pitch that game, is because a studio is, at the end of the day, trying to stay open. So they're trying to work on a project that they both think that they could be reasonably excited about, but they also think that the publisher would be excited about. So he's like, Sony comes in and says, listen, we've got a lot of money that is, we're not taking away from other studios, but is specifically geared towards trying to work within this games as a service thing. And therefore we have a specific interest in greenlighting these types of projects. Even a studio like Bluepoint might go, maybe our best bet is to see if we can ride the wave of the excitement of this, hey, this is our new push. If you can back it, we're more likely to greenlight you. But I think that the pendulum swings in the opposite direction. If that move and that push ends up not landing, you're going to be the first on the cutting block. And then that puts you right back in danger. And so I think if that's what happened here, if you tell Rocksteady, like, listen, we know you make great story games, but just so you're aware, we are interested in seeing if anybody has live service ideas. And Rocksteady goes, well, shit, maybe our best bet to stay open and make sure we continue to have jobs and a career is to try and play into that. Both parties are at fault. But I think it goes to show why. I think sometimes you actually need, to some degree, WB to be like, hey, listen, the chance, if this doesn't work out well, there could be big consequences for you. So before you go saying for sure that this is what you want to do and you want us to greenlight, be sure that you want to do this. Because unlike Sony and Naughty Dog, where Sony allowed Naughty Dog to literally make an entire multiplayer game that was almost ready for release, then get told, hey, to support this, you pretty much can never be a single player studio again. Most publishers will never do that.
No,
you're just going to be told you're you're putting this game out and you're fucking supporting it.
I will say, and this is a little bit of a like Chris was right again moment. But I was really glad listening to that interview that my theory on Bungie, throughout everyone being pissed at Bungie and blaming Bungie for this and making fun, was literally that Bungie just went in there and went, "This is what you got to do," and Naughty Dog went, "No, I'm not doing that." Because that's been my theory of the case for the whole time. It was never, a lot of the reaction was, why would Bungie walk in there?
That was reported though, right? I mean,
no, it wasn't. That was the first time, because the whole scuttlebutt about the Bungie thing was that, at least the people that I was listening to talk about it, but the scuttlebutt was, how can Bungie go in there and tell Naughty Dog not to make or what to do,
Yeah, I'd have to find it, but I swear Jason Schreier had a thing where whenever he reported about the closure of the game...
It was reported at a certain point down the line.
Yeah, he was like,
people still pretend that's not the case.
Yeah.
And it was nice to hear Shuhei be like, that was what happened.
This is a great example of Occam's razor. Like, the most likely answer is usually the answer.
Yeah.
If we heard and they even announced it and went as far as to say we're going to show gameplay and then said, hey, never mind, we're not going to do that, it's probably because they were like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't blame someone for having the thought process of, Bungie got bought, this is live service, we're told Bungie is to shepherd live service. Did Bungie have a hand in this being put this way? But I think as soon as that was cleared up from reporting, it should have been put to bed. But we know that seems to never be how the fuck things go for some reason. Yeah.
The only other factor I can think of for Rocksteady, and this is a unsubstantiated leak on Reddit that has some fire behind it, is that Sony is paying for an exclusive Batman Beyond trilogy from Rocksteady. And if that's the case, then that would be the reason why they're still alive.
Yeah, I'll be curious, because my thing is, I think how well received the Batman Arkham VR game was. And it wasn't even it was from Camouflage, which have done a handful of really good VR games in licensed titles specifically. I think I guess I should just say they've done a handful of really good licensed games, regardless of what medium it happened to be on. I think it's obvious that there is a big hole in the market for a style of Batman superhero game, because Spider-Man's one of the only hero games that's really out and about right now, and it still doesn't do Batman. It doesn't do open world in the way Batman approached open world. And so I think there really is a push for that, and I could see Sony wanting to do that. I'm not saying that I believe this, but I think it's plausible. And at the very least, even if you remove the Sony part of the equation, I wouldn't be surprised if it was just going back to Rocksteady and being like, listen, can you make do you feel like you trust yourself to make a Batman game like you did, shift it around, do something new with it? It's Batman Beyond, new Batman. You don't have to worry about all that. And I'm sure they said yes. And there's enough value in the promise of that they're fine. My only curiosity outside of that is, from what I saw in the meeting, it seems like James Gunn was involved because he is still part of DC. Therefore, any games that have to do with DC were on the table there. I am curious if part of why Rocksteady stayed has nothing to do. It depends on how James Gunn's things continue to go out. I wonder if they're working on a game that is going to actually be considered part of the DC cinematic universe, or whatever they're using as the new terminology. And if that's part of what they're wanting to do here. And the reason Rocksteady stayed is because they do have pedigree.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, the Lord of the Rings games are great, but I think their Monolith's heyday was with Fear for me personally. So,
well, there's a lot, man. The Lord of the Rings games really are great. I think that they were really well done games, and I think that the Nemesis system, which goes back all the way to the first Fear, by the way, it's just it really got to strut its stuff in the Shadow games. I think those are great games, and I think they show why. I even think I'm not surprised that them going towards Wonder Woman, even though I didn't have as much interest for it, happened. But they are a really storied developer. They have been around a long time, and they have a ton of incredibly influential games. And I think, like you said, Fear and Fear 2 are incredible. At the same time as Fear 2, just a little bit beforehand, they're behind the Condemned games, Condemned Criminal Origins,
shit,
Bloodshot. And dude, those games are fucking incredible. They're so good.
I played like half of Condemned on my Steam Deck. It was fucking great. All those mannequins and shit. What a game.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of those things where this is a good example to. This isn't the answer as to why they got cut, though it definitely plays a part. Like you said, Chris, it's been 9 years since they've released a game. They can't really canceling this game and then just investing in another one just means it's 7 more years, maybe, if you're really lucky, 5 until you get another game. And this is exactly why I think development times getting to where they are, for whatever the reason, I don't care what it is, you have to solve this, because it means that studios that might be great studios can never run the risk of trying anything different, including Rocksteady. Rocksteady tried something different and it just didn't fucking work. And I guarantee you there was a risk of them getting closed down here. And it was we're deciding against it, but you're on thin ice. I guarantee you that's what what it is. And that means that used to, and I get that this is apples and oranges in many ways, but you think about the fact that Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3 came out back to back to back, year. Uncharted 1, 2, 3, and Last of Us and 4 all came out 2 years apart from each other.
Yeah.
2007, 2009, 2011, 2013, 2015. That's insane. That is not... I say it's insane because of how much we view these things now. But you look at a game like Death Stranding, a game that was developed and released entirely in 4 years, and a lot of that was because he went and found an engine that he didn't have to worry about doing. But, we've got to get closer to a development cycle to where if something goes wrong in the middle of it, it doesn't have to be the end of the development. And a lot of the reason the cost is what it is because you're having to pay these people for 7 years because that's what it takes to make a game right now. Whatever the reason for that has got to change. And I don't know what it is. I wish I did. It does seem likely that it's just scope and scale. And we have to stop thinking every game. And I don't mean developers. I actually mean gamers. Us as consumers. We have to stop thinking a game is not worth $70 if it's not this many hours, or if it doesn't have online, or if it doesn't have this or none of that.
And here's the thing: if a lot of those features were cut, games might not be $70. Well, okay, let me rephrase. They shouldn't be $70. They will continue to be $70 because
you broke that seal.
Corporations. Yeah. So, but the point remains. But you got anything else you want to go for there? It's sad news. I hope everyone lands on their feet.
I think Monolith is just... I think we're seeing... This is not true of just the gaming. WB as a company, doesn't matter which division you're talking about, has just been severely mismanaged for a long time.
It's kind of insane.
it's just finally bleeding into the games division, and it has been. We remember the big rumors about their gaming division possibly going up for sale 4 or 5 years ago, and it didn't end up coming about. And I bet right now they regret not actually trying to push through with that, because it seems
you have to think that the reason those didn't sell is because they wouldn't have come with licenses. So it's kind of like, well,
okay. It has to be. They don't want to get rid of the IP, but then that would mean that they have to license out. So they have to make a prolonged agreement with whoever's buying them that, yes, you can make these games. But because let's take a second and go through the thing. Is that really the case? Do you think that there's a reason for someone, let's use the example, let's say Sony were to buy Rocksteady, but without the IP? I can imagine that Sony would have enough credence to give, like, listen, what do you want to do? Is there a license you want us to try and acquire that you can work with? Do you want to make an original game? Do you want to work on some of our IP that have been languishing? And I think I could see a value case for that. But I think the other part of that is we weren't behind the scenes, but I imagine it wasn't just, do you want to buy Rocksteady? It was, do you want to buy WB Montreal, Rocksteady, every single game studio that we have all at once? And I don't know if there's as big of and strong of a reaction for WB Montreal being a valuable studio. Maybe. I'm not saying one way or the other, but it's not as obvious as a Rocksteady, or it's not as obvious as a Rocksteady or a NetherRealm. You know, NetherRealm is such an easy studio to buy.
But see, and that's the thing is, I think at that point when you're buying something like that, you buy for Rocksteady and NetherRealm, and you close everything else. Like, so I think these studios were just closed earlier.
Yeah, NetherRealm has to come with Mortal Kombat. Like, there's no way. That's just
there's no way. Yeah, you guys can make the movie,
but I don't think Injustice would matter past that. You know, I think it would just be, listen, we're getting Mortal Kombat because that IP started as gaming.
Getting a NetherRealm PlayStation Battle Royales remake. See, I'm a little surprised that we all know we hate this company. They suck. They're a leech. But Embracer buying Monolith to make Kingdoms of Amalur 2 would have been incredible.
Interesting. I don't know, man. Monolith is such a weird studio, but I feel like they can really do a lot. But one of the things I love about Monolith is they've made a game of almost every style. Which Rocksteady has not done. Like, you know, if you're buying Rocksteady, you're buying them for fucking third person, open world. You're not buying Rocksteady to make a first person shooter, but there's a world in which you can imagine buying Monolith to make a first person shooter because they've shown you that they know how to fucking do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true.
Fear 2 fucking slaps. It's so good.
I love Fear. Yeah, I like Fear 3 a little bit more, dude. That fucking school section. Oh my God.
Fear 3 just seems a little more aimless. I don't think it's a bad game, but I didn't beat it.
Fear 2 is the better story, but that school section is the
shooting
best
in Fear 3 is really good, though.
In the series, anyway, for me.
Yeah. Fear 3 has got the same kind of thought process to me as like Resident Evil 5, where it's like the series just kept moving further and further away from the action horror to just being more action-y. 3 is pretty action-heavy, but it feels good to play. I'll tell you, the shooting is immaculate in that game, actually.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, Brett,
but that wasn't Monolith, weirdly enough. I can't remember who it was.
Oh, I don't remember. But speaking of threes, Activision and Microsoft appear to be reviving the once canceled remakes of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4, with a release expected this year. Rumors have circulated for some time, fueled by Tony Hawk himself, hinting at a special project for the franchise's 25th anniversary, and skateboarder Tyshawn Jones confirming his involvement in an unannounced Tony Hawk game. Speculation intensified when a Call of Duty map, Grind, seemingly contained a teaser for the game. And shortly after, the official Tony Hawk Twitter account, Jesus, that was a weird sentence, posted new parks loading along with the date 3/4/2025. While this strongly suggests an announcement, some rumors indicate the game may be shadow dropped on that date rather than simply revealed. Brett, you going to be shredding some Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4?
I have a confession.
Never played them?
I never played the 1 and 2 remakes.
Oh, man. You
They're
should. They're great.
I grew up, of course, in these games like everyone did, though I'm very partial to Dave Mirra BMX, by the way. I want someone to remake Dave Mirra BMX 1 and 2. Fuck it, do both. But
1 and 2 remake.
I love Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. It's a great game. I have a lot of fond memories of it. But I think what happened, and I wonder if you've ever had a style of game happen this way. And this feels similar to what I was talking about with Rockstar, because there was a point in my life where I liked the Grand Theft Auto games. And then one day I was just kind of like, oh, I don't like these anymore. And it wasn't like a decision I made. It's like I turned it on like, cool, I like Grand Theft Auto. And then I was like, maybe I don't like Grand Theft Auto anymore.
Fair.
And I don't want to say that's exactly what happened. I continued to play Tony Hawk for a long time. Like I remember Project 8 coming out, American Wasteland came out. Project 8 was really cool. I mean, I enjoyed a lot of it. It had the weird jump in the air, hit a button to go into, it would zoom in on the board and you'd flick the right analog stick and it would kick the board certain ways so you could come up with your own flip tricks. It was just an interesting idea. Cool. And they kept kind of doing it. And then, of course, Tony Hawk took that weird ass, like, we're going to go on the Wii and you're going to ride a board and it's going to be Tony Hawk's Downhill. And I remember I was like, I'm okay. But I think the real kicker is that as someone who was I used to skateboard, I still have one and I'm still not bad. I'm not nearly as good as I was. And my joints can't handle it quite as well as they used to be able to. But I remember Skate came along and I was just like, Skate felt like what a skateboarding game should actually feel like to me. And I think what happened is that Tony Hawk lost its place in my mind. Like Tony Hawk's Underground, I'm going to be real with you. I would probably lose my shit if they remade Underground, because I think Underground kind of rides the line a little bit better than these games did. I like that it decided to go very unrealistic with like the kickflip and twist and the crazy ass story. I don't know. I enjoyed how earnest that game was. But Skate had this very raw realism to it. It had the camera that felt like you're making, like the entire time you're playing, you're just filming a skate video. Then you could actually make your own skate videos within Skate. It's open world. You have these huge cities and you're able to run through, and then the controls are more like a skateboard. If you want to do an ollie, you pull the stick back to press your legs in and you flick the stick up to ollie. It felt like taking everything that made skateboarding with your feet and just converting it into a controller, and something felt so intuitive about it. And I've really struggled to go back to a Tony Hawk game after Skate.
Interesting. So I feel like it's the difference between... I want to
try it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's the difference between Burnout and Gran Turismo. Like...
See, I don't know if it's that far, but I kind of get what you're saying. Like a good example is,
that's all.
Sure, but Skate's not really sim, but it tricks you into thinking it is. I think it's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's also here's the thing though. If the scale was just Tony Hawk and Skate, and then the images you wanted to put above that was arcade versus sim, I mean, yeah, Skate is a lot more sim than it is arcade. So I think that's really fair. But, maybe I just need to play 1 and 2 again. Honestly, having not done it, it may be just enough to pull me in and be like, oh, yeah, these games do have something special. Do you have them? Did you buy them?
I own them, yeah. You can play them.
That might be something I do soon. That seems like the right type of game to hop into and just play, and it would probably be something fun to do after coming down off of Talos Principle. So
yeah, I
just
downloaded them again, actually. So yeah, you might as well try it. They're fun games. All right. Next piece of news. Konami and comeback developer of the year, Bloober team, have announced a new collaboration following the success of Silent Hill 2's remake, Game of the Year 2024, Silent Hill 2. The upcoming project will be based on one of Konami's existing intellectual properties, Silent Hill. Though it's not explicitly confirmed to be another Silent Hill title, it is another Silent Hill title. Bloober Team's CEO, Pitor Babieno, expressed enthusiasm about the partnership, highlighting the fruitful collaboration on Silent Hill 2 and the anticipation of delivering something special to players in the future, something special being called Silent Hill 1.
Dude,
I want to be clear. I editorialized a lot of that. They didn't say anything about Silent Hill nor confirm it, but it is so obviously Silent Hill. The way you're going to put Bloober Team on Metal Gear Solid 6? Like, what are we talking about? It's Silent Hill.
I've got to know, how do you pronounce this fucking name? Piotr. Something in my mind was like, is this like putting a Russian accent on Peter? Because that would be so fucking interesting to me.
Piotr.
Piotr.
Brett,
Anyway,
you excited to play Silent Hill 1 remake? Because they need to remake 1 before they remake 2. So
I actually would love to see a remake of 1 because 1's a little more fantastical and insane. Like there's like a part where like there's a demon flying like in Silent Hill. It's a weird game. I like Silent Hill 1, but Silent Hill 2, if I'm being real, if you want to remake another one, 3 is the next obvious remake. 3 is killer. It's such a good game.
Yeah, but you can't play
3 is a
3
sequel
without
to 1. Yeah, that's true. I don't know that I agree with that, but 3 is better if you played 1.
There's a whole thing that happens to the main character that is not effective if you haven't played 1.
If you haven't played 1.
The character is not effective if you haven't played 1. The story is not effective if you haven't played 1. I disagree with you.
Well, what I want to pull into is I don't think this is another remake, if I'm being fair. I think that if I imagine if I were Bloober, they've made their dream remake.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they probably got asked which Silent Hill they would like to remake. I think they literally just went like, we want to remake Silent Hill 2. It's one of our favorites. We think we could do it. We want to see the series come back, and we think the strongest effort to do that would be a Silent Hill 2 remake. Whether or not that's actually what happened, that's what they did, and it fucking they landed it. I agree with you. I cannot believe that I did not play this last year, and I knew. Part of me just knew, but I also was so scared of being disappointed.
Yeah.
So I can't
Have
believe
you gone back?
It's incredible. No, but it's I haven't deleted it because every day I'm just kind of like, I could hop in and play right now.
I kind of want to play it again.
But
I might play it again, actually.
There's like a separate news piece that I kind of want to mention here as to why I'm excited, but I'm also very curious to see, because there was a thing where the executive producer from Konami, I think it was the executive producer of the Silent Hill series, was talking about moving forward with Silent Hill, and that they've lifted the restriction they used to have that Silent Hill games have to be set in Silent Hill.
Okay.
And I don't know how I feel about that. And the reason being is that they've already set up Silent Hill perfectly. They have an in-lore reason as to why every game should be able to be in Silent Hill. And that's because everyone views Silent Hill differently. Everyone's Silent Hill is their own personal version. And so there's no real reason why you can't just call it Silent Hill and go. Because I think the problem with setting it outside of Silent Hill, and I know like they talked about like Resident Evil eventually had to move outside of Raccoon City. I get that. Yes, I do. But Resident Evil also wasn't as tied to lore about the reason that Silent Hill functions the way that it does. Silent Hill's very specific history in the games is why Silent Hill operates the way it does. It's why it calls to people. It's why these fucked up things happen. And I'm a little worried about the implication of taking that and going global with it. What does it mean to play a Silent Hill game where you're not being influenced by the lore of the city, of the town?
Well, you make an argument. Well, two arguments. I guess the first one would be, what if my version of Silent Hill is, I don't know, fucking Sydney, Australia?
Well, I like to say that it would be. As crazy as that goes, like the way the game talks about it, and I say this because someone may go, well, no, the city still exists, and it's just how you view the city. Like Angela's city was on fire, but no. I think you see in both games the moment in which, and I don't want to spoil anything,
but on fire.
Well, yeah, the moment in which you go from your area and then you meet with the final time that you meet with Angela.
Good shit.
When you go through that door, that is not what is behind that door in James Silent Hill at all. It is not a staircase. Mm-mm. It is not leading out. There is no up. And that proves that for Angela, even though she's still in the same city, she is inherently has a different structure. Everything about the city is different. Spatially and temporally, it's different. There is no reason to ever take the game out of Silent Hill because Silent Hill is as malleable as it needs to be.
So let's say you're quote unquote taking it out of Silent Hill, but you're not actually taking it out of Silent Hill. Silent Hill just looks like somewhere else.
Well, it
because if
on
my Silent Hill looks like the Suicide Forest in Japan, right? Like that's still a Silent Hill. But I guess the argument that I would make is that Japan would have its own version of this in this world, right?
I think what I would say to that that's important is it depends on how they approach it. I think it's weird to even bring it up unless you're saying you're going to do something outside of what you've already done. And I think it's fine to do all this, but I think the problem is that they're going to be like, no, this game is taking place in actual Sydney, Australia. And I just don't think that fits because my problem there is you have to extend now. Now you have to fuck with the backing of Silent Hill, and you have to be that the reason that this person in Sydney, Australia is experiencing this is because some of the cultists in Silent Hill have managed to extend their influence outside of Silent Hill by doing something global. And I think that takes away from the very even call there's like a personal nature to Silent Hill that most horror games don't have. So you can talk about Resident Evil moving out of Raccoon City, sure, but Resident Evil is like an espionage, like it's a group. It's not espionage, sorry. It's like a governmental thing. It's like these are cops and government agencies and companies. This is a fucking city that has a history steeped in a cult. And that's why a lot of these things happen. And that's why there's these serial killers that are mentioned in Silent Hill 2 that you see and hear from in Silent Hill 4, even though this is 2 games later. Like that's part of the fun. You get to build Silent Hill as a place through its characters and people that interact with without actually having to worry about what does it look like, what's the layout, what is the art style. All of that just can be influenced by whoever's here. And I just think that's I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm worried. I just think it's an unnecessary move, but I'm very willing to be proven wrong. And if anyone's going to do it, I think Bloober's proved that they have the ability, and I'm willing to let them be the ones to show me that it's okay to move it outside of Silent Hill and that they have the deft hands needed to make sure they don't lose sight of the series. And I say that because, Chris, I don't know how many of the Silent Hill games you played from early PS3 onward. Downpour and all these other games.
I own Homecoming.
Homecoming is I'd say the most Silent Hill game that came out post Silent Hill 4, but it still struggles a little bit, is Silent Hill Origins. No, Shattered Memories is interesting because of how it functions, but it's very weird still.
Yeah.
It's almost a remake in a capacity. It gets weird to say, but if I'm thinking of the right game. Yeah. Anyway, but no, Origins is like more of your traditional Silent Hill, but it's still missing an element because it's like American people who just see the visual style of Silent Hill and trying to make a game around it. I don't know, but because I wouldn't say you're new to Silent Hill, but I think you're newer to your adoration of Silent Hill. Where does this land for you? Because I think all of your current adoration for Silent Hill at all is built entirely off the back of Bloober, whereas mine's built off of Team Silent's original works and then Bloober's really deft handling of a remake of it. Does it sound like? I would imagine you're probably more excited than I am, realistically.
For me, it depends on what they're doing. I think for me, like, I like the thing is, I'm excited for Chronos. Like at this point, I'm like hyped for a Bloober team game, which is fucking insane. After cutting all those fucking skin walls in the medium, wanting to die, I still can't believe the fucking ending of that story. Oh my god, sorry,
wasted potential.
Gave myself PTSD. Just
wasted potential.
Wild.
Because I actually don't think that game's bad. I think it's a perfectly fine game that just at the end you go, what the fuck?
The story ruins the game. So I'm interested to see what they do. Maybe this will be a remake of Silent Hills. That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. Who knows?
All right. Next piece of news is that NetEase's Marvel Rivals has surpassed 40 million players, contributing to the company's net revenue of $2.9 billion for the quarter ending December 31st, 2024. Thank you. I am an investor. Despite this success, NetEase recently laid off several US-based developers from the game's Seattle support studio, which included one of the game directors, Thaddeus Sasser. The company stated these layoffs were due to organizational restructuring aimed at optimizing development efficiency. The core development team remains in China and is committed to the game's ongoing support and future content, which, speaking of, the second half of season 1 launched a couple days ago. So if you are playing Marvel Rivals, have fun with Human Torch and The Thing. Brett, how do you feel about Marvel Rivals firing 6 people in their Seattle support office?
I, of course, have not played Marvel Rivals, nor do I have any interest in it. So I think the best way for me to talk about this is to use this as a way to put a license or to put a magnifying glass to the way that the structure of reporting is motivates people to be inflammatory and make quick judgments and quickly make big stories, because I think that the way that this initially spread made you believe that the entire development team for the entire game was laid off, and that the game director for the game was laid off, which is big news if that happened to any game that is ongoing, because that means everything that made the game. If you announced in the middle of Destiny 2's big run that the team, the A team or whatever it was that people primarily liked their expansions more, if you were like, hey, we laid that entire team off, you'd have people being like, what the fuck? And once everything gets a second to calm down and we start to look more into it, we realize that it wasn't a game director. He is a director, but he wasn't the game director in the way that we talk about that. He wasn't the Kojima of Marvel Rivals. He wasn't the Cory Barlog. He wasn't the David Jaffe. He wasn't fucking any of the people that you would expect. And this is bad. Don't get me wrong. The game is very successful. It's unfortunate that people that helped lead to that success are now without a job, though thankfully it seems to be a very small number of people. The game is corely developed in China. The need for what these 6 people were doing may have gone away, and they may have found better use to be more efficient in China. I do think that it is a difficult pill to swallow, that a game that can be essentially one of the biggest success stories of the year can also still see layoffs. But I think laying off 6 people in a country that is vastly away from where the primary development is happening is not a horror story. This seems like normal general redundancies for positions that may not be needed. And I feel like this got overblown. And I'm not saying we've never done the same thing. I think, naturally speaking, humans and the news cycle and all the algorithms push information in a way that makes it easy to respond too quickly and respond ultimately with wrong information. So in that sense, you know, I feel like this was a weird situation, and it highlights the problems with how things are loosely reported on. This is not something that I would use to criticize someone who I think does, as much as I think I don't always like them as a person. I think Jason Schreier doesn't have a history of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that goes to show the difference between people who are doing the same thing we're doing, and that's not a hit, who are essentially just freelancing their ways into working at sites that have some name pool, but they're not actually journalists. I don't say that to belittle them, but I say that to show that there is a very big difference between the way someone like Jason Schreier reports and that they gather their own information. They do deep dives into it before they decide to report on it. And these are people that hear something from one source and make quick things. Most of these came from the fact that they wrote up articles because somebody tweeted on Twitter, who at least we knew for sure worked at NetEase, that his entire team got laid off. And that's enough for you to just incorrectly give a lot of information, because you're not a real reporter. You're just someone who's trying to get into the, again, no stank. You're getting into the grift of online news cycle, which is not real, which is not, you know, there's no integrity. There's not a process realistically. So
no, I have no notes. Congratulations. Well said. That was nothing from me, because that's how I feel about it. It's like you see that the stuff that was being said when it first happened, and then you like read more of the story and you're like, yeah, I feel bad, but they didn't end Marvel Rivals like it sounded like. Because those first tweets that were coming out were breaking: Marvel Rivals lays off development team, and it's like, I was like, what the fuck? I love this game and it's hugely successful. And then I read it and I went, oh, okay. And then I moved on. Like, yeah, it sucks people lose their job, but it's like, This is a Chinese game. I'm not surprised that a satellite studio in Seattle eventually got moved on from, now that the game is out, successful, and the work is probably done. So
yeah, I think the only thing I want to add to that is for anybody who's listening to this and go, yeah, well, all you guys are doing are reading news that you've regurgitated from someone else. Yes, we are. I'm not denying that. I only want to say that we are not claiming to be news bringers. We are simply using news from websites, and we call it news because they call it news. We're using information and sometimes even opinion pieces to some degree to spur conversation that is our own opinions about things from a limited amount of information that we have as reference.
The biggest thing there that, like, if we were truly hypocritical on that point was if the joke about Bloodborne had been me going, I have sources telling me Bluepoint is making Bloodborne 2, instead of, I think Bluepoint's making Bloodborne 2 because they did Demon Souls and did it so well as a test bed to see if they could do Bloodborne 2 because FromSoft doesn't want to. Like, that's the clear difference. So
yeah,
I ain't got nothing else, man. Marvel Rivals is a great game. I hope that it continues to be.
Yeah, I'm glad that all the people I know who love it still have a game to play, and it looks like it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
It's definitely not. It's crazy. All right, let's move on to our next piece of news. This has to do with Microsoft yet again on this PlayStation/Xbox show, because this is an Xbox podcast. Microsoft Gaming CEO Phil Spencer has elaborated on the company's strategy to release more Xbox games on PlayStation 5. In an interview with the Xbox Era podcast, Spencer acknowledged that while Microsoft earns more revenue from games sold on its own platform, it's essential to reach players who prefer other systems. He said, I'm not trying to move them over to Xbox anymore. This approach aims to allow more people to experience Xbox games regardless of their chosen platform. Spencer also emphasized the importance of transparency, noting that if a game is available on multiple platforms, Microsoft will clearly communicate this to consumers, which means any game announced now that is coming to PlayStation 5 will have a PlayStation logo at a Microsoft first-party development, or at the summer showcase, or at an ID at Xbox. Any of that, if it's coming to PlayStation 5, that logo will be there. It's not going to be some obfuscated, hidden in the Xbox wire thing. Brett.
Yeah, and it sounds like, to add on to that if it's a decision made to go multi-platform later, you'll be told as soon as the decision is literally moved forward. Much to example like we saw with Indiana Jones.
Yep. I don't know that they'll ever do one more thing for a PlayStation 5 version.
That was crazy.
That was
the only reason it was crazy to me, was you just one more thing. Don't get me wrong, it actually was a bombshell, because this game we've been told was an Xbox exclusive that was the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people. That was there's no reason to believe that everything wouldn't come over at this point. I was still a little apprehensive. Like I said, I always wanted to see Forza, Halo, or Gears. Forza got announced. I don't think any game is too sacred. And they've been saying that, but I choose to believe them now. You know what I'm saying? Like, they kept saying it, but they clearly hadn't acted on it yet. Now they have. No game
gods of the whole slate team. We win again.
But past that, what was your question? I just thought that was interesting.
I was just going to bring you in. I feel like this clearly has to be if everything else didn't prove to you that Microsoft is third party, this has to be the end of it, right?
Well, let me ask something to you, because I think this is where I've seen this conversation go, I think is interesting on a person-to-person basis. I think one thing that's clear here is that Phil has essentially admitted, and I don't think that this is breaking news. I think it's just it's a quiet kind of side admittance that the PlayStation, Xbox console war is over. And I don't mean that in a sense of Xbox lost and they're no longer doing anything. I just mean that Xbox bit the bullet and decided it was better to stop worrying about that competition and instead start worrying about how they can just compete with games as a whole under their Xbox brand, which I think is probably the best move they could have made considering their position in the market. With that in mind, I've seen a lot of people say that this means that Xbox is out of the console business and they're not gonna do hardware anymore, and they will become Sega. This is essentially them admitting that they are Sega. And while I do think that they are Sega on a publishing side, I do not view this as some kind of beacon in the air. This is not a flare gun shot signaling that they are done with hardware. I think something I've said for a long time, even if they ever went full third party, I think they still have interest in doing their own hardware and having people be able to get the bespoke Xbox experience with their controller, their box, their UI, just because there's value in that. You don't have to be top of the market so long as you produce and price with that in mind. You can be successful with that, and then you can enjoy your game selling everywhere. I think the reason that it was different between Sega and why Sega didn't do the same thing is because Sega was in too competitive of an environment. It was trying to compete against Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox whenever Dreamcast finally failed. And gaming was not as easy. Shuhei talked about this in his interviews too. I think it was with Colin as well, that gaming no longer, because of its big shift towards digital, you don't necessarily have to have a branch, a headquarters in the area, in the region that you're trying to sell a game in, because you don't have to have the relations for packaging and all that you used to. And with that in mind, I think it's really easy to say at the same point, gaming is easier to distribute than it used to be. And therefore, I think if Sega were giving up the ghost and this part now instead, say that they had survived this long, I think they'd have done the same thing. I think they would still make their hardware, adjust their quantities, and say, listen, you can play your games anywhere, but if you want to play them on a Sega machine, you can still do so.
Yeah,
exactly. Do you think it's the end of Xbox hardware, or do you think this is just a change to what that means, I guess is what I'm asking for you and anybody. I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this, because we have quite a few Xbox listeners who primarily play on Xbox hardware, and I assume they'll continue to do so despite their games going third party, because they're comfortable in that ecosystem and that hardware, that controller, that UI.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that they're going to make some. They clearly intend to. I just don't know what it'll be, but we'll see. I think it's clear that they're going to do a next-gen console and a handheld, and then whatever happens after that happens, but I don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think at the very least, it's clear that they're going to be in the next generation of consoles. I think it'll look potentially different, but they'll still be there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's no way they won't be, I don't think.
Well, one of the things that before we came into this that I talked about is alongside all this, we've also gotten confirmation recently that Fable, which is one of the next big exclusive games coming out of Xbox, has been delayed into 2026 for polish. It was originally supposed to come out sometime this year. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That is what it is. They push it into 2026. And now, while we haven't got there yet, I do have a curiosity as to what this means for day one support of PS5. And I think the reason we didn't get that information immediately is because this is now a decision they have to make. Do we want, with this delay, to try and have a better day one out of the gate sales and better support what we're talking about here with every game going to every console within most games? Or is this strictly, hey, it's only to make sure the game is as good as possible? We'll get it out on Xbox and PC, and then we'll still, if we plan on it coming to PS5, it'll still happen just down the line. I don't really have a gut feeling on this. Part of me could see it going day one because you have this extra dev time. But we talk about, what does this mean? I think the big question is, this is being developed on an engine that has specifically been made and used for Xbox and PC. This is not like an Unreal engine or an open source engine that has, hey, click this to get optimizations for PS5 that you can then further refine. They're having to work this engine onto that hardware and figure out how to optimize it itself, not with a set of assists. And we don't know how difficult that is. So until then, my big thought here is Forza Horizon coming over and being the same engine would lead me to believe that they have a little bit of experience using this engine on this hardware. Therefore, it may make sense to go ahead and use that knowledge they're gaining to work on getting Fable ready for PlayStation sooner than they would have.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll all come Day one at this point, as long as the studio is able to. And that's one of the things Jez Corden has said, that it's basically going to be a studio decision. All games will come over, but if you want to be day and date, you can be day and date, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we shall see. I guess in some related news, Bobby Kotick was on an episode of the Grit podcast where he discussed his initial meeting with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Kotick recounted advising Nadella that Microsoft should exit the gaming industry, stating, you shouldn't be in gaming, you are not a creative company. He suggested that Microsoft would be better suited investing in companies like SAP or Workday. Kotick further expressed that Microsoft's acquisition, of Activision Blizzard underscored his belief that Microsoft needed Activision to navigate the gaming sector effectively, remarking, "You need us because you're not going to figure out gaming with what you have." Brett, Bobby Kotick is an asshole, but is he right?
This one's hard to answer because if I'm going to say, I want to say this while being as reasonable as possible. Xbox has had a long history of finding teams who were already working on something talented, striking a deal with them, and then making that series a de facto Xbox series. Mm-hmm. What I don't think they've done as much of is actually go to a team, say, listen, we want to partner with you. We think that this is a cool game. Build that relationship and then come back to them again and go, what do you want to do now? Let them pitch something new and then work with them as a partner from conception to release as a creative partner. And I think Microsoft hasn't done a lot of that. Almost every series that you think of as a Microsoft de facto series is one that they ended up buying. Forza is a good example where they did not do that, and I think that's a good thing. They built Forza up. Forza Horizon was kind of an offshoot of Forza that I'm not quite sure how the history of that goes, so it's cool that they have something. But I think it's really important to say that at the end of the day, no matter how much credence you give to the Game Awards, no matter how much credence you give to reviews, the fact that Xbox has had a history of really never having a game hit the Game of the Year category, I might be wrong on never, but it's very rare, clearly. And Sony has had a game in the Game of the Year category every year for at least the last 10 years, maybe the last 15. Mm-hmm. And basically what I'm getting at there is where there's smoke, there has to be fire to some degree. But I don't know how much weight that I give this comment coming from Bobby Kotick. And I say this because I would actually argue that Bobby Kotick's era running Activision is the least creative that Activision ever was. Is the most successful, and that's very important because at the end of the day, Call of Duty became a behemoth under him, but also Call of Duty became one of Activision's only products.
Well, sure, but he was also there for Singularity. He was also there for all of this
You're
stuff.
right. You're right. I'm not taking away, but I'd say that his own actions haven't necessarily proven that he is a creative, that he understands what it takes to be a creative company. But I want to step back and say, to his credit, you don't have to be a creative as a CEO to be able to see the value of the creatives within your company. I don't think Activision, in their name only, clearly Activision was also Blizzard. I think Blizzard has, for a lot longer, been a beacon of creativity in gaming. I think a lot of people carry that name with a lot of renown. Microsoft and Xbox, more specifically, I don't think necessarily have that same... I don't think that you think of Microsoft and you think of them working games up from the ground up in the same way that you do a PlayStation or a Nintendo. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but Microsoft just played a different game. And it does seem like Microsoft as an entire company, don't look at Xbox necessarily, are not very creative. There's a reason that Windows is looked at very different than Apple. Steve Jobs was a more creative person, both with his marketing, with what he thought technology could do and how it should be used. And it was in very big contrast to the more cold, calculated, but easier to get out to a lot of people that Microsoft had, right? So like Microsoft's history is in not being that creative, but Microsoft has made a lot of products that I really liked. I love the Zune. I don't know that makes them a creative company, but they took a risk on a device that I really liked. And they also, what is creativity, I guess, right, Chris? Because I'd argue that before Spotify, they were early to the game. Microsoft did the same called the Zune Pass or Zune Music Pass, something like that. And the idea was that you paid $10 a month or whatever the hell it was, and you could just go and hook your Zune up onto the Zune app, and you could just add any song that you wanted to for free to your thing. Well, not for free, but for that $10 price into one thing, and you had access to unlimited music. It was basically a precursor to Spotify, but it was at the wrong time. It didn't land. Zune went under before Spotify became the big thing. Does that make them creative because they had an idea that the industry looks at now and can't imagine without having? Like, I think you'd have a hard time imagining no Spotify, right?
I would.
So I don't know. It's weird, but I at least say Microsoft's lack of consistent and steady success in gaming says that there's something going on there, and that Bobby Kotick, whether you like him or not, is on to something.
I don't think you have to be a creative person to know creativity.
Agreed.
And I think that's the problem, is that I would the only credence I would give to the argue that he's wrong is that Microsoft found creative people to make creative games for their platform. Microsoft found Bungie after Oni and got Halo. Microsoft went to Gears and went to Epic and got Gears.
Got Gears, yeah. They didn't partner with them to really make it. They came into a project that was already going and just said, listen, we want this. And I'm not saying Sony's never done that.
No, but I think the important thing here is that I would argue that Microsoft knows they're not a creative company, which is why they bought Bethesda, which is why they bought Activision, Obsidian, Compulsion Games, Double Fine. These are all creative things. Yeah. So I don't know, man. If I was opening up a gym, I wouldn't hire myself. That's kind of the way this all goes. So I think that's important, but.
Well, and here's the thing. So one important piece for anyone who doesn't have the context, the way that Bobby said the story is that when Satya Nadella became CEO, or very early days of him being CEO, Satya, I don't know how you say his name. Anyway, whenever he became CEO, which was in 2014, by the way, is around the time this conversation happened. So I think this came from Satya being like, "What is advice?" Because we're struggling in the games in the games industry right now, and this is what he said to him there. So I think that there is credence. I think if you look at what was happening at Microsoft within 2014, I think there was a lot less creativity within even the Xbox sub brand, and I think they've worked to foster more and more and more and more. And then, like you said, you buy Compulsion Games, which is a very creative, artistic driven studio. You buy the Ninja Theories, you buy Bethesda, you buy Activision, you buy things that can help you seek out the creatives to fill the void that you have. And so I think what it comes down to is what we're really saying is, in retrospect, Bobby Kotick was right with what he said at the time in which he said it, which is around that 2014, 2015 window. I don't necessarily think that necessarily tracks now. I think Microsoft is doing a better job within the Xbox sub-brand of giving a feeling of creativity. But it depends, because, one of the things I've seen around Avowed is that Avowed is I haven't played it, so I'm only saying what I've seen from other people, even people who like it. It's kind of shallow. It feels like the game was scaled back, and a lot of the things that make RPGs to people and make them feel creative were kind of restricted from this game. Now, we don't know if that's because of Obsidian or because of Microsoft's budget or overseeing. we don't have any of that. But at the end of the day, the proof will be in the pudding. So if Microsoft can continue to put out big games and it can finally get to a point where, as a publisher, we see them have a Game of the Year nomination, even just once every couple of years, I think that opinion that Bobby Kotick originally gave will have turned around. And I think it's in that process now.
Yeah, absolutely. But, Brett, I don't have anything else to say. That is almost the end of the show. Do you have anything else you want to say? Do you want to talk about fucking PS Plus games or something?
No, man, I'm all good. Cool. Out of curiosity, I guess if we're going to talk about PS Plus games, you played Life is Strange, right? You like the original?
Mm-hmm. I like the original. I have the platinum.
So I thought, we talked a little bit about how it was coming out there. We talked about last year, but our last episode. Do you think that you're going to give the what is that series called? Rage, Doom, Bloom and Gloom, or something like that? Rage tapes.
What the fuck?
What the hell is it called? Is it called Lost Tapes?
Yeah, I think that
Bloom and Rage. There we go. I'm just curious because that is a PS Plus game right now and it's free. And while I want to wait until the other parts are out to play it, so apparently it's a 2-part adventure game. This is tape 1, tape 2 will be the other half, and then it'll be done. With this being the people who made the original Life is Strange, is this something that kind of pulls to you at all? Or do you think that part of what made you Life is Strange is that at that point in time you had more interest in these kind of narrative-driven, choice games?
I think it's that. I had more interest. Mm-hmm. And I will say, I like Life is Strange, but I think at that point, that was when I was very much like platinums. And Life is Strange was an easy platinum and a good game. Now it's one of those things where it's a good game and an easy platinum in a genre I don't want to play, so I'm not going to play it, most likely.
That's fair. Yeah, cool. That's curiosity. I'm waiting, but I think I may go ahead and at least, because I'm curious, will tape 2 be a day 1 PS Plus, or is it only tape 1? Because that'd be an interesting marketing ploy. Hey, you got the first half for free, but you got to buy the second.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
It would be an interesting thing to see.
All right, Brett, before we leave here, we're going to play a game. Okay, I saw this online, and now that I'm hosting,
play a game,
I get to do it. So we're going to do an anti-draft because I think this is fun.
The fuck does that mean?
That means I know the category and you don't. We're going to see how close you get by the end. Okay? So you have to guess the category based on my picks, I guess. So I am going to go with incredible Forza Horizon 5.
Okay, 1 second. You distracted me with a picture of a dog and then a message that said, I won't go into that.
No.
You're going to list games, and then I have to figure out what kind of list you're making based on the number of games. Okay,
but you have to draft games too. So
is the idea that
I've got 2 rounds prepared.
Okay, but just so I understand, whenever I'm drafting games, so basically you chose Forza, and then I have to choose a game.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you don't know the category. We see how close you get by the end.
Okay, so I got to. All I'm going to make sure of is the ones that I'm drafting in, I have to draft as an example of what I think you're leaning toward with your list. I want it to be a good fit for your list.
Correct.
For your category. Okay, so Forza Horizon 5. Okay. I'm going to go Doom the Dark Ages.
Okay. Interesting pick.
Okay.
Kind of, I'll critique you at the end. I'm going to take Battlefield 1942.
Battlefield 1942.
No fucking Googling the games, none of that.
No, I'm making sure it's the game I think it is. It's the online one that they did.
Yep.
PS3? Or I guess it was a remake? 2002. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, PS3, they got a remake with, it was a pack-in with one of the Battlefields.
Nice. Interesting. Okay. All right. Go Fable Anniversary. Basically, Fable 1. You can just put Fable. It doesn't have to be Anniversary, but
Fable. All right.
Yeah,
Interesting pick. Fallout 3.
Okay. The Witcher 3.
Interesting pick. Do you have any ideas yet, or do you want to finish out the draft?
No, I don't have any ideas yet.
Okay. Elden Ring.
Okay. This is really like looking at even both the list is very weird.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the through line, there's one game that I think is throwing it off, but I don't know because I've never played 1942. I don't know enough about it, so I'm curious as to things. So I'm going to go Far Cry 2.
Okay. So for my last pick of round 1, I will go with Okami.
Okay, yeah, you've definitely lost me here. Anything I thought it may have been, it is no longer. So for the fun of having a crazy last answer like yours, I want to say Tokyo Jungle.
Okay. So you have one good pick on your list because the category is IGN Game of the Year winners.
Interesting. So The Witcher 3, I'm assuming?
The Witcher 3 won Game of the Year. Yep.
Nice. All
right. Last round. And I'll let you go to bed or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
I am going to take Signalis.
Oh, okay. Hades.
Okay. Cyberpunk 2077.
Okay. What is that game called? Ascent?
I don't know what game you're talking about.
Give me just a second. I'm only Googling to make sure it's the game I think it's called. It may be called The Ascent.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
The Ascent. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where's your mind at right now?
I'm thinking kind of like more electronic inspired science fiction stuff.
Okay.
But we'll see. Because Signalis, of course, is like horror, but it's like space themed horror. And then Cyberpunk has got your, kind of the mixing between technology and the human body. So it could also be body horror because I think Signalis may fall underneath that. So I think Hades is a swing for that. But my initial thought with Hades was maybe we're doing something with indies.
Interesting. Okay.
And then, so we'll see. What's 3?
A Plague Tale Requiem.
A Plague Tale Requiem. Okay. Now I'm starting to think that maybe this has to do with where the game is developed.
Interesting.
And if that's the case, I guess the same thing would work for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024.
Knowing the category, that's the funniest fucking answer you could have given me. All right.
Oh man, I have a fucked up category that's technically right for every game that we've chosen so far, but it's more just my mind thinking too, what's the most crazy thing that you could come out with? I'll tell you in a minute.
All right. Bayonetta.
Okay. So we're moving away from my potential thought of games that are developed in Europe because this Bayonetta was designed in Japan.
Correcto.
Okay. So now I'm starting to see a through line where it's games where you can play as a female protagonist. So I will say, the first Hellblade. And you know what? Yeah. The other
Hellblade?
answer would have been Heavenly Sword, but they're the same developer, same. Yeah,
Heavenly Sword's a good answer. Let's see. Resident Evil 2.
Resident Evil 2, a game that lets you play as a female. Because horror is not necessarily the through line, though I guess there's horrific elements to Plague Tale and Bayonetta. And
all that hair is scary.
All that hair is scary. I'm going to say, I'll go back to, I guess, you already said, I don't want to cheat. You already said Heavenly Sword would have been a good answer. So instead of using that as my immediate...
No, I just said it was a good game.
Oh, okay. I thought you said it was a good answer. But I'm still going to shift. I'm going to say Metroid Prime.
Okay. All right, that's your 5. Brett, do you know the category?
How close was I with games where you can play as a female protagonist?
How about you guess the category, and I'll tell you how close you are.
Oh, that's my guess.
Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. That's the category. Female protagonist.
So The Ascent does have a female Microsoft Flight Simulator. I guess you can be a female pilot. I don't actually know the answer to that.
The plane is female. That killed me when you were like...
Hellblade, Metroid Prime, Hades. You don't get to play as a female that I'm aware of, but you do fight. You do get to fight Megara. So I'm just going to count that as a.
Had you said Hades 2, you would have been.
Oh,
correct.
that's a good example. Example. So do you want to hear? As soon as you said Flight Simulator was a funny answer, do you want to know the fucked up thing that went to my head?
What did you think?
All games that people. There's one. The final game you said loses it. Every other one of these games works perfectly fine with the games that people who did not survive 9/11 were able to 9/11 victims. Games 9/11 victims couldn't have played.
That's so funny. I never would have thought of that, and I love it.
Yeah, my brain was like, what would be the craziest thing you could say that Flight Simulator would be funny for? And I was like, oh no.
That's good.
That's fun, right, but
that's it. That's Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast. That was our podcast for the 2 weeks of February 25th, 2025.
There you go. I hope that everybody enjoyed their Valentine's Day. If nothing else, I always tell people Valentine's Day is a day for you to treat yourself. Yep. Buy that thing you normally feel like you wouldn't buy. Go eat. I mean this wholeheartedly. Go take yourself to dinner and to a movie or something. Go take yourself to something that you normally would think would be weird to go to by yourself and enjoy it.
Is it weird to go see a movie by yourself? I do that shit all the time.
I have never had a big history of it, but I didn't get to go to the movies a lot as a kid, so usually it was the reason we're going into this group activity. But I think a lot of people have this thought process that like going to eat at a restaurant and sit down inside by yourself is a slightly odd behavior.
That I would agree. I think it's a little weird, but I would do it. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I just want Chili's. I'm by myself. Like, what am I going to do?
You also work in food, so I think you view it differently, to be fair anyway.
That's true.
Than a lot
the
of
only
people
thing I think is weird in restaurants is when a couple sits on the same side of the table. That shit is so fucking weird.
I get it because sometimes me and my wife go through. It's like I would like to sit next to you because it's want to be able to kind of be on you. It's not like PDA be on you, but like I just want to be more in your presence. But really, you lose what you gain in physical ability, like to hold hands or whatever like that. You can get back by just going across the other side, and then you get the face-to-face interaction. And you can still hold hands. That's weird. Just different,
Like you're just turned in your seat. You're at a booth, like turned away. That's super dumb. But yeah, that's it. So if you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe. I don't know, all the kind of stuff. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
If you like the show, go and try and flip your car with nothing but your muscles.
True.
And then report back to us as to how successful you were. If you have a smart car, props for having the right car to make this probably a lot easier to pull off.
Please tell us by joining the Discord, which you can find in our description below.
No, fuck that. Better, tweet at us. My @ ChrisFigs _ Brett. Give your picture SQRD. of your pictures of your car sideways. I want to see the bottom side of your car.
Go to patreon.com/Nartech and give us money in your entrance survey. Tell us you flipped your car.
Money, please. No.
But yeah, so that's the show. Thank you for listening. Chris, I hope you had fun.
Do you want to handle the Patreon rigmarole? I know you don't have it in you, but I know you don't have the lists rather in front of you. So you want me to handle that part of the outro?
Yeah, you go ahead and hit it.
Okay, as always, as a way to say thank you to the people who are our patrons and give as little as $1 per month to support the show with more than just their time, which we are very thankful for, we give shout outs. So our newest patron is Mr. Low Rate Nate, but we'd also like to shout out Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Matt Tubbs, Easton328, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villiobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Matthew Green, and Sean Santarud. Thanks to each and every one of you, and we'll see you next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.